Chapter 506. Eric got off the plane and was about to leave the airport with his entourage when he saw Elizabeth in a khaki windbreaker pulling a simple suitcase. She waved at him and quickly walked over. After News Corporation's business center moved to the United States, the Murdoch family settled in New York. During the holidays, Elizabeth would return to New York to spend the holidays with her family. Eric did not expect to meet Elizabeth at the airport returning to Los Angeles. Eric asked the bodyguard to take Elizabeth's luggage and asked, "You're back so soon. Why didn't you stay in New York for a while longer?" "There's no point in staying in New York. I'm always invited to parties. It's so boring. I might as well come back to work," Elizabeth said and looked at Eric. "Speaking of which, I've heard a lot about Firefly investment at parties these days. What are you doing?" "I plan to break up my assets and hide them so that others won't easily guess how much money I have," Eric said frankly. Even if he did not admit it, people would definitely be able to guess. Firefly Pictures could not be hidden for the time being. Fortunately, the entertainment industry had a lot of room for manipulation. Furthermore, Firefly Pictures was not listed. It was not so easy to find out the assets of Firefly Pictures. However, some of the assets in Firefly's hands were clearly exposed. For example, Cisco. If the public paid a little attention, they could easily find out that Firefly Investments was the largest shareholder of Cisco. Cisco's current market value was only about $2 billion, which was not too eye-catching. However, Cisco's development had not deviated from its historical trajectory. The current CEO of Cisco had already confirmed John Chambers as his next successor, and John Chambers was the biggest contributor to Cisco's success in the original spacetime. Therefore, if Cisco's market value still swelled to hundreds of billions of dollars in the future, then the wealth held by Firefly Investments would be too dazzling. Furthermore, Eric had more than one investment in Cisco. After the Forbes list incident, Eric had to plan for the future in advance. After discussing with Chris, Firefly Investments began to deal with the shares in Cisco in their hands. Firefly Investments injected funds into a few selected non-listed funds, and then reversed the acquisition of a portion of Cisco shares held by Firefly Investments. In this way, Firefly Investments quickly scattered the Cisco shares in its hands to these funds. However, because they had signed a complete agreement, after the transfer of shares, Firefly's control over Cisco did not change. There was only one more node in the middle. Cisco's board of directors, who represented Firefly's investment, had not changed. It was still the same few people. This kind of indirect shareholding was very common in North America. Even for behemoths like General Electric, ExxonMobil, or Bell Telephone and Telegraph, their list of shareholders was basically a series of well-known and unknown investment companies, such as foundations, trust investment, capital management, and so on. As for the real owners of the shares held by these companies, no one knew. It was not just Cisco. Firefly Investments would not directly invest in IE, Yahoo, and Hotmail in the future. Instead, they would indirectly invest in development funds through foundations and other methods. When Elizabeth heard Eric's answer, she could not help but laugh. Compared to Firefly Pictures, Cisco's shares should be nothing. Why don't you find a way to hide Firefly Pictures? Eric spread his hands. This target is too big. I can only take it slowly. I don't know why you're doing this. It's like you're afraid that others will steal your things. As they spoke, the two of them arrived outside the venue. Elizabeth waved at the driver who came to pick her up and asked him to leave. She then got into Eric's car with him. Eric got into the car from the other side and continued the previous topic. I'm not afraid of others stealing it, but I have to take care of other people's fragile hearts, right? I don't want people to see that I have too much money and get agitated. Elizabeth obviously treated Eric's words as nonsense. She raised her small fist and punched Eric's shoulder. She laughed and said, "You egomaniac." Eric did not dodge the girl's punches. He said, "I'm going back to the Sharp Corner Manor now. Are you going to my place too?" Elizabeth blinked a few times as if she had just remembered. "Yes, I forgot about this. Hey, Carter, turn around and send me back to Beverly Hills first." Carter Moan looked at Eric through the rearview mirror. As a bodyguard who had followed Eric for a long time, He naturally knew the relationship between Eric and Elizabeth. Continued driving, back to Malibu. Eric waved at Carter and said to Elizabeth, "I remember that Julia also brought the little guy back to her parents' place. Your house hasn't been cleaned in a long time. Stay at my place tonight." Elizabeth's pretty face turned slightly red when she heard Eric's straightforward words. She pretended to be relaxed and turned her head. She put one hand on the car window and pretended to look at the scenery outside. Elizabeth walked out of the bathroom wearing a thick bathrobe. Only then did she remember that her suitcase was still casually left at the entrance of the villa. Her cheeks were slightly hot as she pushed all the eagerness she felt a few hours ago to a certain guy. Elizabeth got off the plane at 4 in the afternoon. After doing some things and taking a nap, it was already past 9 in the evening. She was starving and only then did she walk downstairs hesitantly. The lights in the small living room were on. When she walked in, she saw that the TV was turned on very low. Eric leaned casually on the sofa. A black laptop was placed on an exquisite aluminum alloy stand in front of him. As his 10 fingers moved, there was a slight clicking sound from time to time. Seeing Elizabeth walk in, Eric pointed to the food on the glass table. "I got someone to make supper. I just went upstairs to call you. I saw that you were already showering. What are you doing?" Elizabeth was not in a hurry to eat. She walked behind Eric and leaned on the back of the sofa, looking at the laptop screen. The script for Night Interview with the Vampire. Some time ago, the box office and reputation of 400 Years of Shocking Love were very good. The production department has also negotiated a cooperation agreement with David Geffen. The film will probably be released at the end of the year. How are the preparations for Buffy the Vampire Slayer on your side? "If it weren't for this matter, I would have come back at the beginning of the month," Elizabeth replied. "I also had an audition in New York for the female lead. According to your original suggestion, we plan to choose a girl with a dancing background. This way, we can shorten the training time and make the shooting of the action scenes relatively easier. Also, we can produce the pilot episode before May. Have you chosen the candidates?" Eric asked casually as he typed a line of comments on the script document. "Well, we have selected a few girls. They will come to Los Angeles in a few days to have the final audition with the candidates here." Elizabeth stared at the laptop for a while. Then, she turned around and sat across from Eric. She put the tray of food on her lap and began to eat. Eric nodded softly and continued to type on the document. "Hey, do you want to come over for the final audition? They are all very beautiful girls," Elizabeth said a moment later. Eric smiled and said, "That step is unnecessary. You know my taste. After you choose, just send them directly to my bed." Elizabeth gently spat and pulled off a piece of breadcrumb and threw it at Eric. "Hey, I almost forgot. Why are you at the airport today?" "I thought your mind was full of bad things and ignored this question," Eric teased. He nimbly reached out to catch a piece of bread that flew over and took a bite before replying. "I'm going to San Francisco. Pixar's new animation has been preliminarily completed. I'm going to watch the sample and discuss the Super Bowl trailer with John and the others." "What is it this time, the sequel to Toy Story?" Elizabeth asked curiously. In the past, when Firefly revealed news about Pixar's latest 3D animation to the outside world, they always referred to it as Pixar's new animation. Elizabeth did not pay much attention to it. Now that she heard that Pixar's new 3D animation was about to be completed, she became interested. No, the new animation is tentatively titled The Bug Mobilization. It is a story about an ant family living in an oasis fighting against the enslavement of locusts, Eric said concisely. Elizabeth looked at Eric and waited patiently for a few seconds before asking, That's it? It's boring to tell you the plot now. You can go to the cinema when it is released." "I'm not going, it's for kids," Elizabeth pouted. After eating supper, Elizabeth went to the kitchen to clean up the tableware and returned to the small living room again. Because she slept the whole afternoon, although it was already 10 o'clock at night, she did not have any pajamas. She picked up the TV remote control on the glass table and sat down next to Eric. She pulled a pillow in her arms and casually chose a midnight talk show. After watching the host comment on recent events for a while, Elizabeth said to the man next to her. Eric, is Firefly's next step going to develop its own TV network? Your old man guessed it? Eric turned his head and asked. Elizabeth nodded. Now the integration of media groups has become an inevitable trend. Firefly's industry chain in the film sector has expanded to the limit. The next step is definitely to develop into a comprehensive media group. Not only the TV network, but also the music, publishing, and other businesses will be expanded. Eric smiled and said, but you can rest assured that Firefly will not be involved in print media, so we won't compete with News Corporation in this regard. With the rise of the internet, the decline of print media had become an inevitable trend. Eric remembered that after entering the new century, even the most famous newspapers in the United States frequently encountered bankruptcy crises. He did not intend to waste time on a useless plan that was about to decline. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. I heard that the website you set up at the end of last year called Yahoo has recently been in contact with several print media groups. The editor-in-chief of the New York Post also talked to my dad about this. You must be planning to set up an online news website. Eric temporarily stopped typing on the keyboard and turned his head to look at Elizabeth. He curiously asked, what does your dad think about this? Elizabeth snorted a few times with some pride and did not answer. She looked like she did not want to tell him because she did not want to discourage him. Eric shrugged and understood that Murdoch must not have a high opinion of the prospects of this idea. After being in the media for most of his life, Murdoch certainly could see that the current internet environment did not have the foundation to develop online news on a large scale. At this stage, the internet user base had not yet reached the level of ordinary people. Most of them were concentrated on college students and professional technicians. However, he obviously could not predict how terrifying the explosive growth of internet users would be in the next few years. Hey Liz, if one day I fight with your old man, who will you help? Elizabeth's eyes showed strong disdain. Of course I'll help my dad. You have the nerve to fight with an old man in his 60s? That's shameless. Wrong. I mean in the company? Then do whatever you want, Elisa said lazily as she lay down on the sofa with a pillow in her arms. With the current scale of the development of Firefly and News Corporation, it was certain that there would be a decline and a rise for a certain period of time, but unless there was a huge industry change, it would be difficult for there to be a life-and-death struggle. Not to mention the future. Even now, 20th Century Fox and Firefly already had a competitive relationship in the film business, but the two companies were at peace and even had some cooperative relationships. The situation was the same for several other major Hollywood film companies. Eric smiled and did not say anything. He spent nearly an hour reading the script of Interview with the Vampire. He closed the laptop and patted the girl's smooth leg on his knee. Sleepy? There was no response. Eric turned his head and looked at the girl who had fallen asleep. The new award season did not seem to have much to do with Firefly Pictures. Last year, the films released by Firefly were basically commercial films. Even in the highly manipulative Golden Globe Awards, they could only get a nomination. There were basically no films that had the ability to win. In addition, the company created a miracle of 27% in the box office last year. Firefly's inaction in the awards season inevitably became the target of some sour grapes media. Eric saw several related reports in the New Day newspaper early in the morning, but he did not take it too seriously. He always felt that the role of the film awards was icing on the cake. However, Elizabeth took advantage of this to tease Eric. Chapter 508. Are you not going to participate in this year's Golden Globe Awards again? Elizabeth sat at the dining table with her long legs crossed as she read the analysis of the films nominated for the 50th Golden Globe Awards in The Hollywood Reporter. She asked gloatingly. There were no technical awards in the Golden Globe Awards, and Eric's Tornado last year only had the ability to win awards in the areas of sound and special effects. It depends on my mood. Eric pushed the newspaper aside, picked up the milk in front of him, and slowly drank it. Although Tornado did not receive any nominations, an invitation was still sent to Eric for the Golden Globe Awards banquet. However, Eric had not decided whether to go or not. It was fine if he did not attend this kind of awards ceremony. Once he attended, he would have to abide by the rules of the award ceremony. With his current influence, he would definitely be taken care of by the cameras very often. It was actually very tiring to fake a smile with the atmosphere for 2 hours. Elizabeth also knew that Eric was not too enthusiastic about the Golden Globe Awards and the Oscars. She put down the Hollywood Reporter and casually took another newspaper from Eric's hand and opened it. While reading the headlines of the entertainment section, she asked, "So you really don't plan to fight for an Oscar in the future?" Spielberg became an A-list director since 1975's Jaws, but until now he has been nominated so many times, but those old guys are not willing to give him an Oscar for Best Director. Since they are so stubborn, there is no need for me to deliberately get close to them. Speaking of which, this time's Schindler's List, Spielberg will definitely win an Oscar, right? Of course, his biggest competitor this year is Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, but Unforgiven is a Western film, and Schindler's List is a biopic, not to mention it's about the Holocaust. With the influence of Jews in Hollywood, Unforgiven can't compete with Schindler's List. The reason why Ben-Hur was able to set the record for the number of Oscar nominations and wins was mainly because it praised the Jews. Eric suddenly stopped talking. "Hey Liz, is your family Jewish?" Elizabeth smiled, shook her head and joked, "No, so just say whatever you want to say. I won't expose your racism." Eric heaved a sigh of relief and reflected for a moment. In the end, he still hadn't completely integrated into this world. He was too casual with the topic of race. Americans were very sensitive to racial discrimination. They had even enacted legislation to deal with it. It was fine if they were in a private place, but if they were in a public place, or if there was a Jew sitting opposite him, his words would definitely arouse suspicion and disgust. Although Americans liked to laugh at themselves, jokes about race were a minefield that could explode if they weren't careful. Compared to black people who were weaker, Jews would react more violently when they encountered racial discrimination. Mel Gibson's unfortunate experience in Space could prove this point. When Elizabeth saw that Eric had suddenly quieted down, she no longer mentioned what had just happened. Compared to Eric, Elizabeth, who had lived in the United States for many years, was just like ordinary Americans. She rarely took the initiative to bring up the topic of race. Americans had always done nothing about racial discrimination. After leisurely finishing breakfast, Elizabeth saw that Eric wasn't in a hurry to go to work, so she brought up another piece of news that she had just read in the newspaper. The directional sale contract signed by Paramount and Viacom was declared invalid by the Los Angeles Superior Court. QVC has also made its first offer of $7.8 billion. It's so much higher than your acquisition of Disney last year. I guess this deal will be closed soon, right? No, last year, the total global box office of Hollywood movies increased by 15%. It will definitely maintain a similar high growth rate in the next few years. If I hadn't bought Disney with a high premium last year, I definitely wouldn't have been able to get $6.5 billion this year. Although Martin Davis isn't very good at running a film company, as a shrewd businessman, he must be able to see that since he can't keep Paramount, the longer this deal is delayed, the better it will be for him. When Elizabeth heard what Eric said, she suddenly remembered what happened last year. She said, "Didn't Martin Davis go to Kauai when you were shooting Jurassic Park last year? Why didn't you get involved in this matter? Didn't Lei Sherdong cause you a lot of trouble when you acquired Disney?" "This is a very interesting topic," Eric said with a smile. "For example, if you're racing with a group of people on the track, if you're already in the lead, will you stop to set up some obstacles for your lagging opponents, or continue to run wildly to leave your opponents further behind?" "Of course I'll continue to run," Elizabeth said without hesitation. "But I feel that these are two different things. You won't benefit from stopping to set up obstacles for your opponents, but working with Paramount is definitely different." In the acquisition of Columbia and Universal by the Japanese, the reason why Firefly cooperated with them was that, in that case, Columbia and Universal would give a higher percentage of the profits. At that time, Firefly itself wasn't strong enough. But now if I have a good idea, I can use Firefly's own channels to digest all the profits. There's no need to give part of the profits to Paramount just to set up some obstacles for Viacom. And there's another point. The Japanese are outsiders, and they're not very familiar with the operating mechanism of Hollywood. When they see that the film company's movies are selling well and pushing up the stock price, they can only pay honestly. Viacom is different. Lei Sherdong has been involved in Hollywood since 10 years ago, and he's very familiar with the rules of the game. After Eric finished speaking, he saw Elizabeth in deep thought. He smiled and got up to tidy up the cutlery. He asked, "I'm going to Praia Vista later. What about you?" Elizabeth came back to her senses and said, "I'll go back to Beverly Hills first." Firefly Studios, Digital Domain Special Effects Center. Although a large number of model special effects were used during the filming of Jurassic Park, the special effects artists of Digital Domain never gave up on the development of computer CG special effects technology. After nearly a year of technical research, the dinosaur scenes that needed to be produced using digital special effects had reached a level where it was difficult to distinguish between real and fake. Because there was enough time, Eric did not urge Digital Domain to speed up the production progress. This kind of meticulous attitude made the post-production work for Jurassic Park only 70% complete. It would take at least 2 more months to complete the film. Eric and Stan checked the progress of the previous work together. They repeatedly watched a scene of the Tyrannosaurus Rex roaring to the sky several times. Stan's face was filled with excitement and pride. Even 2 years ago, he would not have dared to imagine that he would have the opportunity to produce such a realistic scene of an ancient beast. "Eric, are you really not planning to release the trailer for Jurassic Park at this year's Super Bowl?" "I think, if this behemoth can appear on the live broadcast of the Super Bowl, it will definitely surprise the world." Stan skillfully operated the computer in front of him and turned his head to ask Eric, who was sitting next to him. Eric was discussing some details with a special effects artist. When he heard Stan's question, he said, "That's exactly why I don't want to release the trailer so early. If we reveal the dinosaur images in advance, the surprise will definitely be reduced when the movie is officially released in the future. But even if we don't show the trailer at the Super Bowl, we still have to show the trailer before the movie is released, right?" Eric replied confidently, "The publicity department has already made the corresponding plan. In the future, when we produce the trailer, we will use Professor Hardman's explanation as the main focus. Using appropriate suspense techniques, the dinosaur will appear, but not its full appearance." This is indeed a good idea. By the way, the post-production of Collision has been completed. Do you want to take a look first? Sure, Eric agreed. The two walked to another work area in the Digital Domain. The script of Collision had been repeatedly revised. The scandalous plot was removed, and the depiction of humanity during the disaster was added. At the same time, with the strong technical support of the Digital Domain, Roland Emmerich boldly added special effects scenes. This series of changes not only made the movie's plot more compact, but the special effects scenes produced were also more shocking than the original version in Eric's memory. After this summer, Hollywood will completely enter the era of special effects movies. Stan found an empty seat in the studio's lounge area and sat down. He couldn't help but exclaim, "If 2 years ago, Terminator 2 and Tornado only showed the huge potential of special effects movies, this summer's 2 consecutive movies, Jurassic Park and Collision, were a box office success, then Hollywood would completely realize the huge commercial potential of special effects movies." Eric and Roland Emmerich sat down on the other side. Eric smiled and said, "In this case, the Digital Domain will definitely expand again. Then the cinema won't be able to hold it now." Stan Winston pointed to the completed Firefly Cinema outside the glass window. Roland Emmerich said to Eric, "I heard that some of the unused land around the studio was bought by Firefly. Why don't you build a separate Digital Domain company park?" Back then, Firefly had bought 100 hectares of land in Praia Vista, and only used a third of it for the construction of Firefly Studios. With the development of Firefly Studios and the surrounding environment, in order to provide a stable living environment for the thousands of employees and their families, the other third would be used for the development of Praia Vista and be rented out to them. The remaining third would be kept by Firefly for the time being. However, although the Digital Domain would definitely expand again, Eric was a little hesitant about whether to build a Digital Domain company park in Los Angeles. Because the tax rates in each state in the United States were different, the labor costs were also different. As one of the states with the strongest economy in the United States, California's tax rate and labor costs were undoubtedly very high. Although the digital domain was currently one of the top special effects companies in Hollywood, Eric had to consider the future of special effects companies. 10 years later, the best way for a special effects company to survive was to move to other states with lower tax rates or even overseas. Eric briefly explained his concerns to Stan. Stan thought for a moment and said, "If that's the case, it's best that we make arrangements in advance and choose suitable locations to set up branches in other states. Also, we can recruit local employees to train in Los Angeles. This way, we can increase local employment and earn more tax benefits." Eric thought for a moment and said, "Don't be too anxious. After this summer, let's see how the two movies react." Roland Emmerich smiled and said, "Eric, don't you have confidence in your Jurassic Park? I've seen some of the scenes. It can only be described as shocking." "Of course not. I'm just worried that it won't reach my original expectations." Stan was also interested. He asked curiously, "How much do you think the box office of Jurassic Park should be?" Eric raised his hands on the table at the same time and extended his 10 fingers towards the two of them. $1 billion? Stan subconsciously lowered his voice and asked carefully. Roland Emmerich also looked surprised. Eric explained, "Yes, but I'm talking about the total box office worldwide." "Even if it's worldwide," Stan stared at Eric, as if trying to determine if he was crazy. "The highest box office record has never exceeded $800 million. E.T. Aliens, $790 million, Roland Emmerich agreed. Since E.T. Aliens was able to achieve nearly $800 million in box office worldwide 10 years ago, it's not impossible for it to reach $1 billion in 10 years. Eric said as he looked at the two people who were still in a daze. He smiled and said, "Why don't we make a bet?" For some reason, when they heard that Eric wanted to make a bet, Stan Winston and Roland Emmerich immediately thought of the 18-year-old boy who made a sensational bet with Columbia Pictures about Home Alone a few years ago. In the end, Columbia lost miserably. Columbia's CEO at the time, Blunt Cohen, also lost control of Columbia. After a moment, Stan Winston and Roland Emmerich shook their heads almost at the same time. "No." Eric laughed. "Don't be like that. I haven't made a bet with anyone in a long time. And this time, I really don't have 100% confidence." Chapter 509. However, because of Eric's in-depth analysis of CAA's operating model, CAA's revelation, as well as the subsequent series of reforms carried out by the agencies that felt threatened by CAA, Hollywood had formed a tripartite situation of CAA, ICM, and WMA. In order to compete with their rivals, CAA could no longer maintain its previous strong position in the process of cooperation with the major film companies. Michael Ovitz's ranking slipped out of the top 5 as a result. In the new Hollywood Power Rankings, Firefly left the other film companies far behind with 27% of the North American box office in 1992. Eric was unsurprisingly ranked first on the Hollywood Power Rankings, while Michael Lynn, the CEO of Firefly Pictures, and Katzenberg, the CEO of Disney Pictures, occupied the 6th and 9th positions respectively. Although the ranking was not too high, Firefly Pictures occupied 3 positions in the top 10. Therefore, there was a lot of discussion in the industry. There was no dispute that Eric took the first position. Firefly's performance was real, and Eric's Tornado also won the 1992 box office with a global box office of nearly $700 million. However, a large number of media outlets found it difficult to accept that Premiere magazine included Michael Lynn and Katzenberg in the top 10. In Hollywood, almost any list was controversial. This was also convenient to stir up a topic and increase the popularity of the list. In the face of the doubts of the outside world, Premiere magazine certainly would not admit that there was a problem with its list. Instead, it was as if it had been injected with chicken blood and used all its horsepower to fight a war of words with the media. Before every Oscars, the main topic of the media was often focused on the films that were nominated for the Oscars. The nominated films all showed their magic, and at the same time, launched a public opinion offensive in the media. However, it was different this year. Schindler's List was placed at the top of the list with its absolute legitimacy. Because of the special status of Jews in Hollywood, the methods of canvassing votes in previous years were basically not very useful this year. The competitors who were also nominated for the Oscars did not dare to launch a public opinion offensive against Schindler's List. In this case, the topic of Premiere Magazine's Hollywood Power Rankings was raised high. Warner co-president Robert Daly said in an interview that it was because the board of directors had not decided on the CEO position for a long time that caused Time Warner's performance to be surpassed by Firefly. When asked about the other Warner co-president Terry Semel, who was ranked second with him, Robert Daly said that he did not comment. Robert Daly's move was obviously to put pressure on the Warner board of directors. According to rumors, Robert Daly and Eric Williams have a close personal relationship. This condition is likely to be an important bargaining chip for Robert Daly to fight for the CEO position of Time Warner, because an important way for the former CEO of Time Warner, Steve Ross, to stabilize his position was to establish a good personal relationship with well-known Hollywood filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg. Former New Line Cinema president Robert Shea publicly claimed that Michael Lynn was just a puppet supported by Eric Williams, and that Michael Lynn had no decision-making power over Firefly's business. Firefly Pictures rarely publicly refuted Robert Shea's remarks, saying that Mr. Michael Lynn had made great contributions to the company in the process of being the CEO of Firefly Pictures. Variety magazine's well-known film critic, Andrew Fraser, publicly attacked the selection criteria of the Hollywood Power Rankings, saying that this list should not be called the Hollywood Power Rankings, but should be renamed the Hollywood Influence List. In the pointy corner manner, Drew had to get up early because of the audition for the female lead of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She sat at the dining table and drank her oatmeal. She casually glanced at the boldface words on the newspaper in Eric's hand and muttered, "I really don't know what's there to fight about. Liz and I are ranked 15th together, but we didn't say anything." Eric flipped a page of the newspaper in his hand and laughed. Could it be that the news that appeared on Hollywood Online yesterday about someone scoffing at the Hollywood Power Rankings was just my imagination? Absolutely. If you continue to be so busy and don't spend more time with me, you will definitely get Alzheimer's early, the girl said with a smile. Her baby face quickly came over. Eric, let's go to Century City today to help us pick the female lead for Buffy, okay? Didn't Liz say a few days ago that she was going to audition for the female lead? Hasn't she been selected yet? No, we have been selecting the director and some supporting roles. The audition for the female lead is scheduled for today. Eric thought about his original schedule for today. There was nothing important, and as the girl had just said, Eric didn't want to become a robot who only knew how to work. Well, I will call the studio later and tell them that I won't be going today. When will the audition start? At 10 o'clock, so we don't have to be too anxious. There are only 16 finalists. We will definitely finish the audition today, so we don't have to be too anxious, Drew replied. While Eric and Drew were still talking about the female lead for Buffy in the pointy corner manner, Michael Eisner had already arrived at the Burbank Universal headquarters. Due to the turmoil at Universal Pictures last year, Michael Eisner, who had only been in charge of Universal for a year, was ranked 10th by Premiere Magazine on the Hollywood Power list. But whether it was in front of reporters or in private, Michael Eisner was very indifferent about it. As the film critic from Variety magazine had said, the Hollywood Power list was essentially a list of the influential figures of the previous year in Hollywood. Although it was ranked 10th, Michael Eisner, who had complete control of Universal, had a much higher power in Hollywood than this list. After all, Universal was one of the 7 major film companies, and had a deep foundation. At the end of last year, Universal's fourth quarter profit was higher than that of the previous 3 quarters combined. Michael Eisner had also consolidated his position in the heart of Panasonic's parent company. However, Hollywood's model of relying on big-budget movies to generate most of its profits had gradually become popular. In order to achieve better results, it was definitely not feasible to rely on low-budget movies. Not to mention, any film company had its own limit of releasing movies. Therefore, Michael Eisner had been selecting suitable big-budget projects for Universal since the end of last year. So far, Universal had started shooting an action film, The Fugitive, starring Harrison Ford, with a total investment of $50 million. It was an adaptation of a TV series, and the project was snatched from Warner Brothers Entertainment. Because of its high expectations for The Fugitive, Universal paid the copyright company an extra $3 million, and also increased the salary of the director and the male lead, Harrison Ford. If Eric were here, he would be more surprised by Michael Eisner's vision. The Fugitive was the first film introduced to the mainland in the 90s in the original spacetime. When Drew was looking for the copyright for Flower Pictures, Eric also had the idea of this movie. Unfortunately, Eric did not have any accurate information about this movie in his memory, so he could only give up in the end. In fact, although Michael Eisner had let go of the production business in the last few years at Disney, and mainly focused on the publicity and marketing of movies, during the Paramount period, Michael Eisner also served as the head of the production department under Barry Diller. When Raiders of the Lost Ark was mentioned, most people might think of Steven Spielberg first, but few people knew that the reason why Raiders of the Lost Ark could be filmed was inseparable from Michael Eisner's support at that time. After a short regular meeting with a few executives at Worldwide, Michael Eisner returned to his office to start the day's work. The assistant put a stack of documents that had been prepared in advance on Michael Eisner's desk and handed the top one to him. He said, "Mr. Eisner, the legal department just sent over a document. They said that the idea of remaking The Mummy was first proposed by James Jacks of Alphaville. They got the remake authorization in 1991, and the agreement was to develop it together with Worldwide. However, at that time, Sid Sheinberg was only willing to make this movie into a low-budget horror film with an investment of no more than $10 million, so they temporarily gave up the idea of filming. If the other party is not willing to give up the original authorization, they will need to pay at least $2 million in legal fees to get the authorization back, or drag it out until the authorization expires." "How long was the original authorization?" Michael Eisner asked without raising his head. The assistant hesitated and said, 10 years. "Then you can call James Jacks directly. Either we pay him a sum of money and he gives up the authorization, or we meet him in court and he will get nothing in the end." The assistant opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but he quickly nodded. "Okay, Mr. Eisner. Also, the first draft of the script for The Mummy has been completed. In the second-to-last folder, according to the model of Raiders of the Lost Ark, there is foreshadowing for a sequel." The production department asked if they should start looking for a director and male and female lead. Michael Eisner found the script for The Mummy and flipped it open. He hurriedly read the outline of the story at the front and looked up. "Send a copy of the script to Mr. Spielberg and ask if he is interested. Also, contact Nicole Kidman for the female lead." "Mr. Eisner, I don't think Nicole Kidman is suitable. After Mr. and Mrs. Smith, her salary has increased to $10 million, which is the highest among the actresses. Also, the female lead in The Mummy is a weak librarian. It is too different from the female killer in Mr. and Mrs. Smith." Michael Eisner looked up and said to his assistant, "I don't think you have seen Nicole Kidman's Sleepless in Seattle and Tough Cop. She is a very malleable actress with excellent acting skills. It is definitely worth it to have a higher salary. Also, I have some other considerations, so just do as I say." The assistant nodded. Seeing that Michael Eisner did not have any other orders, he turned and left the office. Michael Eisner turned his eyes to the script for The Mummy again. A month ago, Michael Eisner found the remake plan of this movie in some of the project documents left behind by Sid Sheinberg. This made him very quickly want to imitate the style of Raiders of the Lost Ark and develop an adventure series about mummies. Westerners had always had a strong interest in adventure and treasure hunting. In addition to the success of the Raiders of the Lost Ark series, Michael Eisner believed that as long as he could find an excellent script with excellent special effects, the series would have a great chance of success. He had already thought about the idea of Spielberg as the director and Nicole Kidman as the female lead. Although he also knew that the possibility of Spielberg agreeing was not high, He was at least sure that it would not be a problem to let Spielberg be the producer. As for the female lead, in addition to Nicole's current box office appeal, Michael Eisner also had the intention of testing Eric. If the script was handed to Nicole, Eric would definitely be able to see it. Last fall, because Worldwide had taken the initiative to cover up the matter of Joanna Pakula, Eric still owed him a favor. Michael Eisner was sure that Eric would take this opportunity to return the favor. Michael Eisner knew that as long as the Mummy series was successful, his position as the CEO of Worldwide would become unshakable. Therefore, Michael Eisner spared no effort to make so many arrangements. At the headquarters of 20th Century Fox in Century City, with the expansion of TG, Elizabeth rented an entire floor of the Fox building as TG's headquarters. When Eric and Drew arrived at 10 o'clock, a large group of girls and their agents had already gathered in the corridor on the floor where TG's company was located. As they walked through the corridor, Eric could even see that these girls' eyes were obviously beginning to light up, like little female wolves who had seen their prey, and he was sure that it was definitely not an illusion. A girl in a beige trench coat was the first to put down her reservations, and walked forward to greet Eric, and ask for his autograph. The other girls who had reacted also gathered around. Eric signed a few autographs for these girls who looked to be only 17 or 18 years old, and then was escorted into TG's headquarters by the building's security guards. Throughout the whole process, the girl beside her had been watching all of this with a smile. The two of them pushed the door open and walked into Drew's office together. The girl suddenly rushed to Eric's side. Eric subconsciously covered his chest with his hands and said with a smile, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't tell me you're jealous of how popular I am?" The girl rolled her eyes at him, but one of her little hands reached into Eric's coat pocket. Soon, she took out a few small pieces of paper filled with contact information from both pockets. Chapter 510. Shaking the stack of paper in his hand, Drew smirked and asked, "Someone just stuffed something into your pocket. Didn't you feel it?" "I thought these girls were taking advantage of me." It was impossible for Eric not to feel it, but he didn't take it to heart. He reached out and took the paper from Drew's hand, only to find that it was a photo with contact information written on it. In the past 2 years, Eric no longer had to audition for the lead roles of ordinary actors. He only sent out audition invitations to famous actors who met the requirements. He didn't participate in the audition for the supporting roles, so he hadn't encountered this kind of situation for a long time. Looking at the photos of the young and beautiful girls, he felt a sense of novelty that he hadn't felt in a long time. It seemed that a few years ago, when he had just made a name for himself in Hollywood with Home Alone, he had encountered a similar situation when he had held a party at his home in North Hollywood. Eric and Drew were together commenting on the photos of the girls in their hands. Drew's office door was pushed open, and Elizabeth, dressed in a capable black professional suit, walked in. "Eric, I heard from Ellie that you were here. I thought she was mistaken. Good morning, Liz." Eric stuffed the stack of photos into Drew's hands. He stepped forward and kissed the girl. "You are so beautiful today." Although Elizabeth enjoyed Eric's hug, she felt that Drew was staring at her. She could only rub Eric's cheek uncomfortably and push him away. She fiddled with a strand of blonde hair on her forehead and said, "The audition is about to begin. I will take you to meet some of the main creators of Buffy." "Well, let's go." Eric nodded. The three people left the office together and walked through an open office area into a spacious room used for the audition. The people in the room who were talking in low voices stood up when they saw the three of them come in. Their gazes focused on Eric at the same time. "Eric, this is David Greenwalt." Elizabeth first pointed to a middle-aged Caucasian man wearing black-rimmed glasses and introduced him. "He is very good at youth and horror film production. In the 1980s, he shot several campus comedies. Last year, he also directed 2 episodes of The X-Files. We invited him to be the director of the first season of Buffy." "Hello, Mr. Williams." David Greenwalt reached out with a smile and shook Eric's hand. "It's nice to meet you. I'm your fan." "Thank you." Eric let go of the other party's hand with a smile, but he couldn't find any trace of this person in his memory. However, after hearing Elizabeth say that David Greenwalt had filmed an episode of The X-Files, He was probably a director under Fox. This is Mr. Joss Whedon, the screenwriter of Buffy. Elizabeth quickly pointed to the second person. Eric shook hands with the other party again. At this time, Joss Whedon was just in his early 30s. He had a shrewd appearance and looked much more pleasing to the eye than the bearded man in Eric's memory. After a brief introduction of the other main creators, everyone sat down behind a long table in a row. Eric declined the seat in the middle that was originally arranged for him, and chose an empty seat on the far left. He came with the intention of passing the time, and didn't intend to participate in the audition. Looking at the stack of actor forms that Tina Fey handed to him, Eric picked it up and returned it. "Tina, I don't want this. How many scripts of Buffy have you produced?" Everyone in the audition room was paying attention to them. Tina Fey didn't dare to say anything. She took the things that Eric handed over and put them back in the folder. She pushed her glasses and said, "The scripts for the first 6 episodes have been completed. The plot of the later scripts is still under discussion." "Then let me have a look at the scripts for the first 6 episodes. Tina Fey looked at Drew and Elizabeth, who were sitting in the middle. She quickly nodded to Eric and walked out of the audition room. After a while, she returned and handed a printed draft to Eric. The audition started at 10 o'clock sharp. Eric casually flipped through the script of Buffy in his hands. When he encountered an audition girl that he found pleasing to the eye, he would stop and watch her performance for a while. In addition, listening to Drew and the other main creators asking questions in a serious tone, Eric finally realized that the girl who always pretended to be an adult had really grown up. Buffy was a TV project that TG had focused on developing this year. It also represented the ambitions of several women in the TV industry. In addition to Eric, who was the nominal producer, Elizabeth and Drew were the producers themselves. Although TG had developed to a scale that surpassed many of the veteran film companies in Hollywood, because they were backed by Firefly and Fox, TG didn't get involved in distribution at all. Therefore, production had become the company's only core business. In a situation where they didn't have any distractions, although they had to do everything personally, they were still able to manage everything in an orderly manner. Because it was the last round of the audition, the corresponding process was a lot more meticulous. In the 2 hours of the morning, only 5 girls had passed. TG was very considerate to entertain the girls who hadn't yet participated in the audition in the Fox Building's restaurant. Eric didn't join in the fun. Instead, he ate lunch with Elizabeth and Drew in the TG company's lounge. Tina Fey, who had originally wanted to go to the restaurant with the company's other employees, was also stopped by Drew. After the waiter who came to deliver the food left, Elizabeth couldn't wait to ask, "Eric, what do you think of the girls from this morning?" "They're all good. You can choose as you see fit. I won't comment," Eric said casually as he tore open the wrapping paper of his lunch. These were words from the bottom of his heart. Although there were countless TV series that started shooting in Hollywood every year, a TV series like Buffy, which hadn't even started production yet, had already had a promising future. Therefore, many agencies and actors were fighting over it. Previously, Buffy had already gone through 2 rounds of elimination. Up until now, there were only 16 candidates left. To be able to reach this stage, the actors' abilities weren't too big of a problem. Now it was up to the creative team to choose. At this time, in addition to the performance of the actors themselves during the audition, it also began to test the actors' other soft strengths. If the actor's agent had enough connections, and was able to privately contact the producer who had the right to speak, then the actor's chances of being selected would be very high. Of course, this was often the time when the director or producer with the right to speak would fish for private benefits. Small actors who were eager to become famous would basically automatically send themselves to the door when they received a hint. Even if they later found out that they had been cheated, they could only admit that they were unlucky. Thinking of this, Eric smiled and said to Elizabeth, "Liz, this is a good opportunity for you." Elizabeth was a little confused at first, but she quickly understood. Seeing that Eric was joking about the previous incident, she helplessly rolled her eyes at him and lowered her head to eat her lunch. "Speaking of which, I haven't seen Julia for a long time." Eric saw that Elizabeth wasn't bickering with him like before, so he changed the topic. This girl really takes one step at a time. Last year, around this time, I asked her to start shooting movies. She really made a lukewarm movie, and then there was no more news. Hee hee. It wasn't known what Elizabeth was thinking, but after hearing Eric's words, she suddenly laughed. Tina Fey raised her head in confusion. She didn't understand why Elizabeth was laughing. Drew also grinned and said to Eric, "This is actually your fault. If you go to Beverly Hills more often to teach Julia a lesson, she will definitely be more diligent." Eric looked at Drew's smiling expression and was a little suspicious. Did this little girl also know about Julia's situation? Although he was thinking this, Eric still said, "Okay, I'll go over and take a look tonight." The afternoon audition soon began. Eric continued to be bored. Originally, the other main creators of Buffy thought that the audition would be led by Eric. Seeing this situation, they gradually relaxed. Originally, they thought that the audition would pass peacefully. However, a tall girl walked into the audition room and immediately caught Eric's attention. Another acquaintance. Eric sighed in his heart at the coincidence. He also raised his head and listened carefully to the girl's self-introduction. "Hello everyone, my name is Charlize Theron. I'm 18 years old and I'm from South Africa." At this time, Charlize Theron's height had already grown to more than 1.7 meters. Her face still had baby fat and she looked a little immature. However, the natural laziness in her eyes gave her the aura of a stunner a few years later. The girl was originally skillfully introducing herself. Her gaze inadvertently swept over Eric, who was sitting in the corner. Her gaze froze for a moment, and she was momentarily surprised. However, she quickly relaxed. Then, her gaze involuntarily drifted to Eric's side. Eric also noticed Charlize Theron's momentary loss of composure. When he came over in the morning, he didn't see her in the hallway. It was obvious that she had come to the audition later. It was probably because of this that Charlize Theron didn't know that he was sitting in this room. After all, the girls who had made it to the last round of the audition knew how fierce the competition was. Of course, they wouldn't take the initiative to reveal any information to the latecomers. Some of the girls who knew that Eric was in this room had more or less taken the initiative to interact with Eric during the audition process. Although they didn't have any results, it was obvious that these girls were scheming. After Charlize Theron finished her self-introduction, Elizabeth, who was sitting in the middle, asked, "Miss Theron, your information shows that you started learning ballet when you were 6 years old. You even joined a ballet company in New York. So, what made you give up this career and change your career to become an actress?" Charlize Theron quickly said, "Because I injured my knee when I was dancing last year. It took me a few months to recover. During the recovery process, I felt that dancing might not be suitable for me. My dream since I was a child was to be an actress. So after my injury healed, I started to study acting at a drama school in New York while working part-time." Another voice quickly asked, "Don't you think it's a pity to give up after 12 years? Maybe if you persevered for a few more years, you might have become the most dazzling new star on the Broadway stage?" There was a brief hesitation in Charlize Theron's expression. Eric was also curious about how the other party would answer. Obviously, Charlize Theron wasn't prepared for this question in advance. Although this question wasn't related to the audition, Charlize Theron knew that she couldn't refuse to answer. After thinking for a while, she said, "I don't think it's a pity. If a person realizes that what they are doing is not what they want to do and still forces themselves to persevere and waste time, then that would be a pity and a sad thing." It seemed that Charlize Theron was very satisfied with this answer. After being asked a few simple questions, the audition entered the acting stage. Most of the acting scenes were scenes from the script in front of Eric. In the first season, Buffy's character was still somewhat immature. If her identity as the chosen one was stripped away, then she would be like most high school students who had entered puberty. She was naive and rebellious, full of yearning for hazy love, but she also had the lack of confidence that most girls would have when facing the boy they liked. However, Eric's impression of Charlize Theron's screen roles was basically similar to the queen holding a wrench and hitting a man's leg bones. Seeing Charlize Theron imitating the shy high school girl in front of him, Eric felt that it was out of place. Therefore, when Charlize Theron acted as Buffy and watched the boy she liked leave, she asked Giles with some lack of confidence, "Do you think this dress makes me look fat?" Eric finally couldn't help but laugh out loud. The somewhat abrupt laughter not only interrupted Charlize Theron's performance, but it also made the other people in the audition room look over. Sorry. Eric quickly waved his hand. "I just thought. Well, it's okay. You guys continue." After leaving the Fox headquarters building, Charlize Theron lifted her foot and kicked the lamppost in front of the building, but the irritation in her heart didn't dissipate. It's all that hateful guy's fault. Charlize Theron believed that her performance at the beginning absolutely didn't make any mistakes. After all, she had prepared for this audition for so long. Not only did she watch the movie version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer many times, but her agent also found some more detailed information for her through some private channels. But because that guy had suddenly laughed during the audition, it was difficult for her to calmly continue the audition, so she made several mistakes in a row. Although the audition officers didn't show it, she could still see the disappointment on their faces when they left. Chapter 511. Charlize Theron didn't know how to explain this to her agent. For her audition, her agent had used a lot of her connections. Although she was in New York, she would call her almost every day to ask about the time. After confirming the audition date, she would repeatedly remind her of some things to pay attention to over the phone. She didn't expect the result to be like this. She was almost certain that the audition was almost a failure. Although they hadn't known each other for long, Charlize Theron was still very clear about her agent's domineering personality. She had messed up such a good opportunity, and it would be difficult for her to get another opportunity from her. She wasn't in the mood to go back to the hotel directly. She lingered on the side of the road for a long time. In the end, she decided to call her agent first. She looked around and walked to a public phone booth. She took out a few coins from her bag and put them in. She quickly dialed her agent's phone number. "Hello, Michelle, this is Charlize." A capable female voice quickly came from the phone. "Charlize, how did the audition go?" Charlize Theron hesitated for a moment, but she still told her agent the truth about what happened during the audition in detail. "Michelle, I didn't expect Eric Williams to appear there. I don't even understand, that bastard." Charlize Theron wanted to continue, but the female voice on the other side of the phone immediately became stern. "Shut up, Charlize. I'll pretend I didn't hear what you just said. I definitely don't want to hear anything similar from you in the future. Do you know who Eric Williams is? How dare you use that word to describe him?" Charlize Theron was stunned. She held back her slight grievance and said, "Sorry, of course I know who he is. I'm just a little." "Okay, I understand, Charlize." The voice on the other side of the phone quickly softened. She seemed to think for a moment before saying, "Eric Williams suddenly laughed during your performance. This is at least much better than his previous reaction to you. I'll make a few calls to test him. Before that, stay in the hotel obediently and don't run around." Charlize Theron touched her bag hesitantly. Because TG's audition was held more than a week later than expected, she didn't have much money left. Other than the money she had to save for the plane ticket, the remaining money was only enough for her to continue staying in Los Angeles for 3 more days. Moreover, she didn't want her mother, who was far away in South Africa, to send her living expenses. She wanted to return to New York as soon as possible. Not only did she have a place to stay, but she could also continue her modeling job to make ends meet. "But Michelle, I know. If necessary, I'll lend you some money for emergencies. Stay in Los Angeles obediently and wait for my call." The agent on the other side of the phone, Michelle, interrupted her again. "Also, Charlize, if Eric Williams is interested in you and wants to see you, I think you should know what to do." Charlize Theron tightened her grip on the phone. Of course, she knew what her agent meant. Thinking of the abominable guy who suddenly laughed in the audition room, although she was a little unwilling, she also knew that this was definitely an opportunity for her to rise to the top in a single bound. Faced with Charlize Theron's sudden silence, the agent on the other side of the phone didn't urge her and waited patiently. After almost a minute, Charlize Theron finally said, "Michelle, I understand. Very good, Charlie. You should understand that since you want to enter Hollywood and you don't have parents or relatives who are producers in big film companies, you have to give something up. If you are lucky enough to have a big backer like Eric Williams, you won't have to bow down to anyone in Hollywood in the future. Think about Nicole Kidman. That lucky girl was just an unknown actress in Australia a few years ago. Now, she has become the #1 actress in Hollywood with a box office of $10 million. Many girls spend their entire youth in Hollywood, but they may not be able to reach that level. All of this is definitely not because her acting skills are good enough, nor is it because she is beautiful enough. These two things are the cheapest in Hollywood. Charlize Theron quietly listened to his agent's lecture. He couldn't help but think of the scandal between Eric Williams and Nicole Kidman that he had seen in some gossip magazines. She was a very precocious girl. When she said that acting had always been her dream during the audition, it was just a cliché that everyone would say. 99% of the handsome men and beautiful women who wanted to enter Hollywood wanted to become a big star, get a movie salary of millions of dollars, and live a rich life that ordinary people yearned for. After chatting with her agent for a while, Charlize Theron returned to the motel in West Hollywood with mixed feelings. After completing the audition in the afternoon, Eric and Elizabeth returned to her and Julia's villa in Beverly Hills. In the evening, Drew also dragged Tina Fey over for dinner. Because of Eric's arrival, Elizabeth sent away the servants in the villa. During dinner, everyone gathered around the square table in the dining room. Eric thought that no one would remember the little episode in the afternoon. However, when all the dishes were on the table and everyone was about to start eating, Elizabeth still asked, "Eric, why did you suddenly laugh when you were interviewing the girl named Charlize Theron in the afternoon?" As soon as Elizabeth spoke, Drew also acted like a curious baby and looked at Eric with a strange expression. "Yeah, it's so strange. I thought you would keep silent. But speaking of which, that girl is really beautiful." Because the few women present had different thoughts about Eric, they formed a very strange state of balance. There was no scene of jealousy, but this didn't mean that they would calmly face other women entering Eric's life. Even Julia, who had been holding the little girl tightly in her arms as soon as Eric arrived at the villa, showed a curious expression after hearing Elizabeth and Drew's words. Eric shrugged with a magnanimous expression. "There's nothing strange about that. I just thought that the girl's performance was very interesting." However, it was clear that Eric's personal credibility had reached a negative level in the hearts of the few women. Hearing him say this, Elizabeth dragged her voice and said, "I think her performance was very good. Although the final result will be decided after repeated discussion, that girl is obviously not suitable. I've decided to eliminate her." Eric thought that it was not suitable in the first place. Just as he was about to speak, Drew, who was sitting on the other side, said, "Eric, it's not impossible if you just want to play around. Just don't bring her home. There are already enough." Looking at the helpless expressions of the other three women, Eric raised the spoon in his hand and knocked the little girl's head. "You're the only one who knows how to talk." The little girl rubbed her head unhappily. "Humph, I'm obviously telling the truth." Just as they were chatting, Eric's mobile phone in the living room rang. Tina Fey, who was sitting closest to the door, was about to stand up. "I'll go get it." "Let me do it." Eric held Tina Fey down and left the dining room. The call was from Kapoor. Eric exchanged a few words with him before Kapoor tentatively asked if he was interested in a girl during the Buffy audition in the afternoon. Eric was a little surprised. He was very interested in how Kapoor knew about this matter, so he asked. Kapoor said, "It's like this. That girl's agent, Michelle Simmons, is currently an agent in the New York branch of ICM. She used to be an employee of UTA. You might not remember her, but she called me in the afternoon and asked me to test you on this matter. She said that the girl has good potential. Eric, if possible, maybe you can consider her." UTA was a management company that Eric had rebuilt after buying Kapoor's personal management company. Later, because it violated the federal anti-monopoly law, Eric sold all of UTA's shares. Kapoor also brought all of UTA's celebrities and agents to join ICM. This was something that happened 2 years ago. Moreover, before that, Eric didn't often care about UTA's operations. Of course, he didn't remember that there was a person like Michelle Simmons. However, since Kapoor was his subordinate, Eric didn't hide anything. He told him the truth. Kapoor, during the audition, I could see that the girl had good potential. However, she wasn't suitable for the role of Buffy. I think she lacked the naivety that a middle school student should have. She appeared too mature. Therefore, she was more suitable for a role that was older than her. You can ask that Michelle Simmons to work hard in this direction. Since Kapoor hesitated for a moment before saying, Eric, since you also think that the girl has good potential, and she hasn't left Los Angeles yet, are you interested in taking some time to meet her? Eric raised his eyebrows in surprise. Kapoor had always been very helpless when it came to matters between him and the girls. He didn't expect that this time, he would suddenly say something like matchmaking. Kapoor, are you drunk? Didn't you always oppose me? That kind of thing? Of course not, Kapoor quickly said. I'm just asking on behalf of someone else. If you're not interested, then forget it. I'll tell her the truth. After saying this, Kapoor said goodbye and was about to hang up. Eric wasn't willing to let him go. He laughed and said, Don't hang up, Kapoor. What's going on? If you don't explain it clearly, I'll have to ask around myself. Well, it's nothing. I just owe Michelle a favor. That's it. Eric still had some doubts. Kapoor said, That's it, Eric. Eric thought for a while and felt that something wasn't right. If you only owe her a favor, with your resources, you can definitely give that girl a very good opportunity. Even if it's a lead role in 1 or 2 movies, it's not impossible, right? ICM was one of the 3 major Hollywood agencies, alongside CAA and WMA. After Kapoor joined ICM with all of UTA's resources, he became one of the senior partners who owned a portion of ICM's shares. With the resources in his hands, it should be easy for him to repay Kapoor's favor. Kapoor realized that Eric wouldn't let it go until he got a clear answer. He could only say, Eric, Michelle is a very career-minded woman. Does it have anything to do with this? Eric asked. Kapoor nodded and continued, Michelle's main business is in New York. However, as you know, New York is where many television networks are headquartered. ICM's business there is mostly related to television dramas or advertisements. In fact, even if I don't participate at all, Michelle can use her connections to get some roles for that girl. However, she probably isn't willing to stay in her current state. She wants to develop in the direction of being a movie star manager. Eric was puzzled. If that's the case, you can still help her easily, right? Kapoor said helplessly. Eric, don't you understand? To put it bluntly, Michelle hopes to become a gold medal manager like Parker Kingsley, who has an A-level superstar under her control. However, this isn't something that can be done with just 1 or 2 movies. It requires a lot of luck. After all, only those movies that sell well at the box office can produce superstars. In the entire Hollywood, at least in recent years, you obviously have the most opportunities in your hands. Eric thought for a while and laughed. That seems to be the case. Then, haven't I become the target of many people? Kapoor said, of course. In the entire Hollywood, as long as it's a project that involves you, even if it's just a roundabout way of doing it, you will become the focus of the major agencies. In fact, I know that Miss Bellymore and the others are doing Buffy. If you pay attention, you'll notice that the actresses you auditioned today are mostly from the 3 major agencies. Those second and third tier agencies can only snatch a few audition spots. Eric was a little surprised. He really hadn't paid attention to this point. However, after thinking about it carefully, this should be the case. Let's not talk about the agencies. Take the future broadcast schedule of Buffy, as an example. He heard from Elizabeth that Fox had already booked the first full season of Buffy. Moreover, it would start in mid-September and would be broadcast every Monday during prime time. This was hard to imagine for many TV dramas that were still in the script stage. Chapter 512. The production process of American TV series was very standard and complicated, and the competition was extremely fierce. Often, only 1 out of 100 scripts would be selected. Many American TV series that had entered the filming stage would go through a rigorous screening process after the production of the pilot episode. Then a portion of them would be eliminated. In the end, the new American TV series that could be broadcasted on TV stations were usually reserved for 6 episodes. After the first broadcast stage was completed before Thanksgiving, if the ratings were good, the subsequent episodes would be produced. If the ratings were too bad, the series would be cut in half. Even Murdoch couldn't buy the entire first season of an American TV series, just because it was produced by his daughter's production company. At most, he would only give some preferential conditions if the TV series performed well in the ratings. Now, Buffy hadn't even been produced yet, but Fox had already booked the first season of the show. Eric couldn't think of any other reason other than the fact that he was a producer who had put his name on the show, but hadn't actually done anything. Kapoor saw that Eric hadn't spoken for a while, so he asked tentatively, "Eric, are you still there?" "Yeah, I'm just a little surprised." "Hee, you're now the most powerful person in Hollywood." "Then, regarding the matter just now, do you want to take some time to meet that girl? Didn't you say that she had a lot of potential?" Eric smiled and teased, "I'm now a little suspicious. What do you owe Michelle Simmons? Is it a favor or a romantic debt?" "Hey Eric, don't joke around. My son is already in middle school." Okay. If that's the case," Eric rubbed his chin and thought for a while, then said, "I'll take some time to meet that girl. To be honest, I just thought of a good idea." Kapoor asked, "About the movie?" "Yeah, I just thought of making an action movie series with a female protagonist. That girl is only 18 years old. There are still benefits. At least if the movie does well at the box office in the future, we can make a few more sequels. How can the box office of a movie you made be bad?" Kapoor complimented from the bottom of his heart. He then smiled and said half-jokingly, "When the time comes, leave a few more actors for ICM." "Of course," Eric said. "That's all for today. I'll get Alan to contact you when I have time." After hanging up the phone, Eric turned around and saw the girl who had been eavesdropping sneakily behind him jump over. She grabbed Eric's arm and asked, "Eric, what girl? What movie?" "It's that girl from this afternoon. Someone asked Kapoor to call me." Eric pinched the girl's face. "Speaking of which, you're already 18 years old. We can take out the copyrights from Flowers Pictures to let you hone your skills. Let's start with the female action movie I mentioned earlier." Drew was well aware of the little treasury that Eric had prepared for him. "Are you talking about the movie version of Thunderbolt Charming Baby?" Eric brought Drew into the restaurant again. After sitting down, he said, "That's right. 2 years ago, Flowers at the End of the Road and Tough Cop Flower performed very well in terms of box office and reputation. Last year's Pink Alliance is also enough to prove that female-themed movies have a lot of potential." The girl who had always been cheerful was now a little nervous. She looked at Elizabeth and the other girls and said, "But Eric, I don't know if I can do it well. Also, what about TG?" Eric said, "This is not something that can be done in a short period of time. Also, I think it's not a problem to leave TG to Liz." Hearing Eric's approval of her, Elizabeth was a little proud at first. Then, she became dissatisfied. "I don't want that. TG was originally established by me, Drew, and Julia. Why should I have to do all the work while the two of them can easily get the dividends?" "Then I'll sell TG shares to you," Drew said without hesitation. Elizabeth was stunned and did not know how to answer. Julia, who had been hugging Emma, also became nervous. "Why don't I? I'll also give up my shares of TG." Julia's words were obviously filled with guilt. Ever since TG was established, she had basically not helped with anything. She only invested a few million USD when the company was established, but in the past 2 years, she had received more than 10 times the dividends from TG. It was also because of this money that Julia became lazy and uninterested in acting in movies. She was not even interested in the Walk of Fame that Eric had painted for her. Hearing Drew and Julia's words, Elizabeth became embarrassed. I didn't mean it that way. I was just saying. I didn't mean to ask you to give up your shares." Eric gently knocked on the table and interrupted the women. "Actually, I have an idea. You can listen to it." 20th Century Fox's film business has not been very good in the past 2 years. I remember Liz told me that Mr. Murdoch wants to buy TG, right? Seeing Elizabeth nod, Eric continued. In that case, we can consider selling TG as a whole to 20th Century Fox. As for whether the three of you want to exchange for Fox's shares or cash, that's up to you. Then, Drew can leave and come back to run his own flower pictures. Liz, you can go to Fox. With your performance in the past 2 years, I think you can at least get the position of Vice President of 20th Century Fox. Eric paused. He didn't finish his sentence. As long as everything went well, Elizabeth could slowly climb up in Fox's system and eventually take over the Murdoch family's news corporation. Although Murdoch had always been inclined to let his son take over, if his daughter's performance was too eye-catching and far surpassed his son's ability, Eric believed that the other shareholders of News Corporation would not agree even if Murdoch still wanted to give power to his 2 sons. After all, although News Corporation was firmly controlled by Murdoch, the Murdoch family did not have absolute control of News Corporation. The investors would definitely be more inclined to give the investment to the more capable person. After Eric finished speaking, Drew immediately nodded in agreement. Elizabeth also looked like she was deep in thought. Tina Fey was like an outsider, eating the dinner in front of her in small bites. Only Julia opened her mouth as if she wanted to ask, "What about me?" Eric cleaned up the dinner on the plate quickly, and then glared at Julia, who was looking around. "As for you, we'll talk about it later." Julia shrunk her neck guiltily and raised Emma in her arms. I want to sleep with Emma tonight." The little girl did not know why her aunt would raise her, but children obviously liked it. She giggled and waved her little hands excitedly. Eric took out a tissue from the paper box and wiped his hands. He got up and walked to the little girl's side and took Emma from Julia's arms. "Come, Emma, let's go watch TV." TV, the little girl called out. She was not shy at all, and even reached out to grab Eric's collar. As Eric walked, he asked again, "Little girl, I have something to discuss with your aunt tonight. Do you want to sleep with Aunt Liz or Aunt Drew? Oh, and Aunt Tina too?" Although the 2-year-old little girl could already understand Eric's words, she thought for a while before saying, "Aunt." "Oh, that won't do." Eric smiled and shook his head. He picked up the remote control and turned on the TV. He sat down with the little girl in his arms. "Choose another one." Emma, who was sitting on Eric's lap, stared at him with her big eyes for a moment and suddenly said, "Daddy." Eric hee. Hearing the little girl's crisp "daddy," the laughter of a few women immediately sounded in the dining room. Eric smiled and pinched the little girl's face. He turned to the few people in the dining room and asked, "What's going on? Why is she calling me daddy again?" Elizabeth had already considered Eric's suggestion just now. When she heard him, she said in a sour tone, "You're going to be a father anyway. What's wrong with having another daughter? You're still not willing?" "No, it just feels weird." Eric shook his head and thought of something again. He asked, "Hey, speaking of which, I remember now. What's the name you registered for the little girl?" "Emma," Elizabeth replied. Eric felt that Elizabeth's tone was a little strange. He asked, "I mean the surname." There was a moment of silence in the dining room. Eric had a bad feeling in his heart. These few women won't really mess around, right? In the end, Drew whispered, "Eric, don't you know?" "I know? Yeah, I heard that it was your opinion." Eric felt his temples twitching a few times and asked, "What is it?" "Emma Roberts Murdoch Barrymore Williams." Pfft. Tina Fey, who didn't know what was going on, suddenly laughed out loud when she heard the long list of surnames. The remote control in Eric's hand also fell to the floor with a thud. After a while, Eric said to Elizabeth, "I seem to remember asking about this. At that time, someone even vowed that they would never add my surname behind the little girl's name. What's going on?" Elizabeth faced Eric's questioning and put her hands on her waist in defiance. "We added it because we wanted to. The surname Williams is not exclusive to you. We can't use it." "Exactly," Julia muttered softly, but quickly slipped into the kitchen to wash the dishes. Drew sat down next to Eric and betrayed Elizabeth without hesitation. Liz was worried that using the surname Murdoch would cause misunderstandings. I was just joining in the fun. Eric knocked Drew's head out of habit and was speechless. You can join in the fun too. The day after Eric and the women discussed the plan to deal with TG, Murdoch, who was far away in New York, urgently called Eric. Although TG's shares were not directly related to Eric, according to the contract signed when TG was first established, Firefly, who owned the distribution rights of all TG's movies in the North America and the surrounding operations rights, was still TG's biggest beneficiary. These two interests could split more than half of the profits from TG's movies. Fox, on the other hand, only owned the low-profit overseas distribution rights, and also had to give TG a share of the profits. Fox's profits were only 15% of the total profits from TG's movies. Elizabeth, Drew and Julia shared about 30% of the total profits. If Fox acquired TG but couldn't get back the distribution rights from Firefly, it would be the same as not acquiring TG at all. Murdoch obviously wouldn't do such a thing. The valuation of TG was also a matter that required long-term negotiations. This was similar to the situation of Miramax, which was also seeking to be sold. Although history had changed, in the past 2 years, Miramax Pictures, owned by Wayne and Stan, still suffered huge losses due to excessive expansion of the business and had to find a backer. However, the Wayne and Stan brothers had asked for $500 million, while the major studios or investment institutions that were interested in acquiring Miramax only valued it at about $50 million. The difference was 10 times. The most important bargaining chip for Miramax Pictures was the Oscar public relations resources in the hands of the Wayne and Stan brothers. This kind of intangible asset was really difficult to estimate. As for Miramax Pictures' film library and distribution channels, to be honest, the major Hollywood studios didn't care much about it. The most important bargaining chip in TG's hands, other than Eric's support, was undoubtedly the 3-year option contract with Jim Carrey. With Jim Carrey's momentum of breaking $100 million in 3 consecutive low-budget comedies in the past 2 years, even if he produced 1 movie per year in the remaining 3 years, it was estimated that he could bring in about $300 million in profits. Although the two sides were getting along more and more because of the conflict of interests, and there was even news that Jim Carrey contacted a lawyer to try to sue to get out of the option contract, the relevant people in the industry knew very well that Jim Carrey had no way to get out of the contract with a penalty of $100 million. Otherwise, with Jim Carrey's box office potential, the major studios would have already started to poach him. In addition, if TG's TV series Buffy the Vampire Slayer was as successful as the original one, it would be another very important bargaining chip for future negotiations. TG's business plan for 1993 had already been determined in advance. Even if they wanted to start the acquisition negotiations, they would definitely start in the second half of the year. Murdoch called Eric and wanted to get an accurate answer from Eric. Chapter 5:13. After hanging up the phone, Eric left the balcony and walked back to his office. Nicole, who had been sitting quietly on the sofa and reading a magazine, looked up curiously. This was Eric's personal office in Firefly Cineplex. Because he rarely worked here, the furnishings in the office were very simple. There was a set of office desks and chairs, a set of sofas, and a row of bookshelves with many documents on the opposite side of the desk. Seeing Eric sit down, Nicole poured a cup of coffee for Eric and placed it in front of him. She asked, "I think I heard TG's name. Did they call?" "It was Rupert Murdoch." Eric shook his head. In addition to confirming the sale of TG from Eric, Murdoch also hoped that after Fox completed the acquisition, Fox and Firefly's original rights in TG could be swapped. In other words, Fox would take back the North American distribution and peripheral development rights of TG's movies, and at the same time, give the overseas distribution rights to Firefly. Eric also knew what Murdoch was planning. Although he would give up 15% of TG's interests, he could keep the movie company in contact with him. This was undoubtedly the most beneficial plan for Fox. As long as Eric agreed to this condition, Fox was willing to pay $80 million to redeem TG's distribution rights in Firefly, and pay $120 million to the other 3 women for the acquisition of TG. Without Eric's interference, TG's most profitable movies were Jim Carrey's comedies. With the frequency of one movie a year in the next few years, Jim Carrey's box office appeal was at its peak after the accumulation of his previous movies. As long as he didn't dabble in the arts and didn't make any changes, it wouldn't be a problem for him to make a total of $300 million in profits from 3 movies. Fox's offer of $200 million in total was also reasonable. After all, the $80 million that Eric received to invest in the movies could multiply several times in 3 years. Hearing Murdoch's name, Nicole didn't ask any more questions. She took out a thick stack of scripts from her handbag and handed them to Eric. "Pete gave these to me yesterday. I think he wants you to take a look at them." Eric took the script and saw the eye-catching title The Mummy on the cover, as well as the logo of Universal Pictures. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Other than the script, did Worldwide pass me anything else?" Eric asked and let go of the script. Nicole shook her head. "No, but Pete did some research after receiving the script yesterday. This movie is a remake of an old Universal film from 1932. Michael Eisner personally made the decision to make it into a series of movies like Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. Universal sold the rights to the remake to an independent production company, and now they're trying to take it back. It seems that they're still in contact with Spielberg, hoping that he can take on the role of director." Pete said that the possibility of that happening is low, but Spielberg should be able to take on the role of producer. The producer in charge of this project also said yesterday that if I can sign on for another movie, they're willing to compromise on the pay. Many of the plots in Hollywood commercial films had already been finalized. Although the script in Eric's hands was a little different from what he remembered, the general concept of the plot and the setting of the characters were similar. After hurriedly flipping through the script, Eric looked up and asked, "What do you think?" Nicole put down the coffee cup in her hand and said seriously, "I used to play those noisy characters. I think the role of the knowledgeable librarian in this script is quite interesting." "In that case, take it." Eric put the script on the coffee table. After thinking for a while, he walked back to his desk. Nicole looked at Eric's back and said, "But this is a Universal movie. Michael Eisner." "Haha, I'm not that stingy. As long as you like it, it's fine. Besides, if you don't act in it, Universal will look for other actresses," Eric said as he took out a phone book from the drawer of his desk. He quickly found a number and picked up the landline on his desk to dial it. Nicole was a little puzzled by Eric's actions and didn't say anything to disturb him. Eric picked up the phone and waited for a while. The call went through and he said, "I'm Eric Williams. Please pick up Mr. Eisner." In an office at Universal's headquarters in Burbank, Eisner's assistant was very surprised when he heard Eric introduce himself. He even forgot to inform Eric in advance and directly transferred the call to Michael Eisner's landline. After the call went through, he realized something. He stood up and pushed open the door to Michael Eisner's office without knocking. He saw that Michael Eisner was already smiling and talking on the other end of the phone. When he saw the assistant suddenly barge in, he didn't get angry. He just waved his hand and gestured for the assistant to leave. "Eric, I didn't expect you to call. What's the matter?" Michael Eisner asked with a smile as he chased the assistant away. He leaned on the sofa and asked, "I just saw the script for The Mummy. It's a good idea." Eric's tone was also very casual. "However, I can see that Universal is planning to develop a series. I don't know if you have the complete script for the series. The outline is fine too. I want to take a look." Michael Eisner's fingers, which were rubbing on the table, paused for a moment. He quickly smiled and said, "Of course, no problem. I'll get someone to send it to you. By the way, where are you now?" "Pria Vesta," Eric replied. "Oh, the post-production of Jurassic Park should be completed soon, right? It's a pity that we didn't see the trailer of this movie at the Super Bowl," Eric replied without changing his tone. "We'll see it soon. I believe many people will be surprised." "Then I'll wait and see," Michael Eisner said with a smile. "Don't forget to send me an invitation during the test screening." "Okay, I'll find a reporter to take a photo of you participating in the test screening. This is a great opportunity to promote Jurassic Park," Eric said half-jokingly. Michael Eisner raised his eyebrows. If such a photo was released, the relationship between the two of them would definitely be thawed. Haha, I'll cooperate with you. If there's nothing else, let's have a meal together when you're free? No problem. Then goodbye, Eric said. After hearing the other party's response, he hung up the phone. Michael Eisner heard the busy tone on the other side of the phone. He didn't put the phone back. Instead, he held the phone in his hand and gently tapped on the table. He frowned slightly as he thought about Eric's purpose for calling. Is he trying to confuse me with his importance to the script of The Mummy and make Worldwide invest more? After thinking about it, Michael Eisner felt that it was unlikely. The other party wouldn't play such a low-level trick. Then, what's the purpose of this call? Although he couldn't figure it out, Michael Eisner quickly ordered his assistant to send the series outline of The Mummy to Eric. He wasn't worried that Eric would plagiarize the script of The Mummy or anything like that. If such a thing really happened, then Worldwide could happily fight a lawsuit against Firefly. While Eric was on the phone, the curious Nicole had already pulled a chair and sat across from Eric. After Eric hung up the phone, Nicole asked curiously, "Hey, why do you want the script of The Mummy?" "I'm very interested in the special effects of The Mummy. I want Digital Domain to take over the special effects of this movie." Eric didn't hide it, but he couldn't explain it to Nicole too clearly. Specifically, he was very interested in the special effects of the second film of the original, The Mummy. In the script just now, Eric had already seen clues about the reincarnation of the female lead, Evelyn, and information about the undead army of the ancient Egyptian god of death, Anubis. In the original, The Mummy 2, the undead army summoned by the Scorpion King left a deep impression on Eric. Due to the high cost of manpower in the West, it was basically impossible to achieve a war scene with thousands of soldiers and horses in real life within the budget of a movie in this era. The only way was to use computer-generated special effects. And if Worldwide's outline of the script was not too different from the original, taking over the special effects production of the sequel of The Mummy would be a very good opportunity for Digital Domain to develop large-scale war special effects. Although Eric had already signaled for the Digital Domain to start developing related technologies, no one knew what the specific effects would be without real movie works to train in practical application. They also didn't know which aspect to develop and improve the technology. Large-scale war special effects were a very important part of the development of future special effects movies. If Digital Domain grasped the opportunity in this area, they would be able to have a big lead in technology over other movie companies. Even if the series outline of The Mummy that Worldwide sent over later didn't have the undead army scene, Eric planned to develop a related special effects movie in the next 2 or 3 years for Digital Domain to practice. Nicole wasn't very interested in the topic of special effects. Her slender fingers flicked a few times on the script, and she looked at Eric and said, "If you really don't have any objections, I'll let Peter talk about the contract with Worldwide." Eric looked at the thick script under Nicole's arm, and suddenly thought that since Michael Eisner sent the script to him through Nicole, the reason should not be just to let Nicole ask if he was willing to let her play the role. Thinking about the inside story of Joanna's sudden resignation half a year ago, Eric took the script again, pulled out a pencil from the pen holder next to him, tapped the table, and thought for a while. Finally, he wrote a number of 5% on the cover and handed the script to Nicole. Nicole tilted her head to look at the number and asked, "What's this?" "Your personal salary should be $10 million now. I owed Michael Eisner a favor last year, and now it's just the right time to pay him back. You can let Peter help you talk about a 5% share for all channels. Although giving up a fixed salary will make it take a lot longer for you to get back your salary, you'll definitely get more than $10 million. If you give up your salary and take a share, it'll indirectly increase Worldwide's confidence in this project." "Oh, you're using my contract to do a favor, and you don't even ask if he's willing to do it. Who knows if this movie can make $200 million. Nicole rolled her eyes, but the corners of her mouth were still curled up. Eric felt the girl's anger, and very considerately asked with a smile, "Are you willing to do it?" Nicole was not short of money at the moment. It was not a bad choice to get more money, and let Eric remember her. She pretended to think for a moment and said reluctantly, "Okay, I'll do it." But with the matter of Jack Nicholson before, do you think Worldwide will agree so easily? Jack Nicholson's salary in Batman was a hot topic for many stars in the entertainment industry. Many people dreamed of having such a chance to make a fortune. Eric said, "If Worldwide doesn't agree, then you can just take $10 million directly. It's not a loss for you." Nicole nodded thoughtfully, reached out and grabbed the pencil from Eric's hand, and directly added a number in front of the 5% figure on the cover to make it 15%. Then she said to Eric, "Then I'll let Peter start with 15%. Maybe in the end, it'll be more than 10%. Although this movie is a big investment, even including the distribution fee, the total investment will not exceed $100 million. If I only take 5% of my $10 million, it'll be a loss." Computer-generated special effects movies had just become popular in the North American and global markets for a few years, and it was the time when the market was booming. The script of The Mummy was also very good. As long as the main creators did not mess around and maintain the standard of the original version in Eric's memory, it would not be a problem for the movie to earn more than $300 million at the box office worldwide. Based on a rough estimate, the investment was $60 million, the publicity was $20 million, and Worldwide would be able to recoup all the costs by relying on the box office. The subsequent videotapes and related products would be even more profitable. Within the 2-year distribution cycle, it would not be a problem for the movie to earn more than $200 million. If Nicole could really negotiate for more than 10% of all the channels, she might become the first female star to step into the $20 million club. Thinking of this, Eric could not help but give Nicole a thumbs up and said with a smile, "You're ruthless. Women are the most vicious." "Bah, don't say that about me." Nicole lightly slapped Eric's hand and put the script in her bag. Then she asked with a smile, "It's almost noon. Let's go to Venice Beach for lunch, shall we? There are a few good restaurants there." "Won't we be surrounded?" Eric asked with a smile. Mr. and Mrs. Smith was still showing sporadically, and some overseas markets were in full swing. Nicole's fame was at its peak, and now her every move was being closely watched by the paparazzi. Although the possibility of the paparazzi sneaking into the studio was not high, as long as the two of them went out, they would definitely be surrounded. "I'll ask my assistant to drive the car away first, and you can find an ordinary car. We can sneak out. Even if we are discovered, I don't have a boyfriend, and you don't have a formal girlfriend. What can they say?" As Nicole spoke, her eyes became resentful. "Or are you saying that you don't want to show up with me? Stop, your eyes are too lethal. I surrender." Haha. Chapter 514. Although they were very careful and even borrowed an ordinary car from an employee of Digital Domain, there were many filming crews at Firefly Studios at any time. Of course, Nicole was not the only celebrity there. In the end, Eric and Nicole could not escape the paparazzi's pursuit. The bodyguard drove the car and parked outside an Italian seafood restaurant in Venice Beach a few kilometers away. As soon as Eric and Nicole got out of the car, 5 or 6 paparazzi immediately jumped out of the car that was tailing them. They excitedly pressed the shutters on Eric and Nicole's faces. Eric saw the other 3 bodyguards get out of another car and quickly move forward to block the paparazzi. He immediately realized where the problem was. The tall and strong bodyguard sitting in the driver's seat just now was too obvious. The paparazzi, with a keen sense of smell outside the studio, saw that the driver of the inconspicuous car was actually such a professional security guard who could be recognized at a glance. Of course, he could tell that the person sitting in the back must be someone important, so it was not surprising that he followed. Nicole skillfully put on her sunglasses to block the flashing spotlights around her. Then, she smiled at Eric apologetically. She knew that Eric did not like to appear in gossip magazines. If she had not insisted, this would not have happened. "Let's go." Eric also put on his sunglasses. He stepped forward and put his arm around Nicole's shoulder. The two quickly walked to the restaurant. When the paparazzi saw Eric's actions, they became even more excited. They took pictures and asked loudly without any scruples, "Eric, are you and Nicole dating? Will Nicole be the female lead in your next movie? Do you have plans to get married?" Eric and Nicole walked into the restaurant without saying a word. The paparazzi were blocked by the restaurant's security guards. Eric vaguely heard a paparazzi's indignant argument. "Eric, I'm so sorry," Nicole whispered after entering the door. Eric let go of Nicole's shoulder and said with a smile, "You know, I'm the kind of guy who doesn't care about debts. As long as you don't mind." Nicole smiled and shook her head. "Of course I don't mind." A blonde waitress with a few cute freckles on the tip of her nose led the two of them to a seat with a wide view of the sea. Then she handed the menu to Eric and Nicole excitedly, but her eyes were fixed on Eric. "Mr. Williams, Miss Kidman, welcome. What would you like to eat? What delicious food do you have here?" Eric asked casually. The waitress stared at the side of Eric's face and recommended, "Our pan-fried sea bass is not bad. We just had sea bass flown in from Peru this morning. We also have cheese butter baked prawns and seafood pasta." Eric flipped open the menu and glanced at it before closing it. He raised his head and asked, "Where's the wine?" "Our white wine here is pretty good. It's Verona's specialty, Sivil dry white wine. It's best to eat seafood with white wine." The waitress did not avoid Eric's gaze when she saw him raise his head. Instead, she boldly looked into his eyes and said with a smile, "Then we'll order a bottle of dry white wine." Eric did not know where Verona was and guessed that it was a place in Italy. After saying this, he looked at Nicole, who was seriously flipping through the menu. "Nicole, what would you like to eat?" It took them a while to finish ordering. After the waitress walked away, Eric showed a lingering fear expression. "I was really worried that the girl would suddenly say that our deep-fried Williams here is not bad." "Haha, don't talk nonsense. Maybe she's your fan," Nicole said with a smile. As they were talking, the spotlights on the beach not far from the floor-to-ceiling window lit up again. The beach was a public place. Neither Eric's bodyguards nor the restaurant's security guards could chase them away. Eric looked at the paparazzi holding the telephoto camera helplessly and said, "It's awards season now. What's the use of following us? We have no nominations." Nicole motioned to the restaurant's waiter to draw the curtains of the floor-to-ceiling window next to her to block the distant view. Then she said, "I've seen some articles mentioning you in the newspapers these days." The tone was sour. "But do you really not have any intention of shooting an Olympic film?" "Not yet. You know Woody Allen, right?" Nicole smiled and said, "How could I not know? It was so big last year." Eric did not talk to Nicole about Woody Allen's trivial matters. Instead, he said, "Then you should also know that he never attends the Oscars. Even when he won the Best Director award for Anne Hall, he did not attend. I agree with his attitude towards the Oscars. He said that if a director shoots his own work to win a film award, then he will subconsciously be bound by the rules and give up what he wants to express." Woody Allen is one of the few film directors who can be very popular in several major film festivals in North America and Europe. I think this should have a lot to do with him not being bound by the rules and focusing on his own work. "He's a very interesting director," Nicole commented after listening to Eric's words. "Speaking of which, although Woody Allen is in a slump right now, I'm sure he'll make a comeback in a few years. He'll always be able to portray the female lead in his films beautifully. Are you interested in working with him?" "No, I want to focus on shooting commercial films now. When I earn enough money that I can't spend it all in my lifetime, then I'll do something I want to do, like winning an Oscar for Best Actress or something. Once I'm successful, I'll have 2 or 3 children and focus on being a good mother. When that time comes, a lot of people will definitely say, 'Wow, Nicole Kidman is a has-been. She can only muddle along in some small artistic films.'" Eric said with a smile. But thinking back carefully, although several generations of famous Hollywood actresses were very keen to participate in Woody Allen's films for more than 40 years since the 1970s, Nicole had never worked with Woody Allen. The only time she publicly announced her intention to work with Woody Allen was Encounter with a Stranger. The news was only revealed for a month before Nicole quickly expressed her resignation. In the end, the female lead of that film became Nicole's best friend, Naomi Watts. They can say whatever they want. What about you? Jurassic Park should be finished soon, right? But I haven't heard any plans for your next film. There's no plan. Eric shook his head honestly. If Jurassic Park achieves expectations, it'll be considered a phase of completion. I'll have to take a break. Eric's box office expectations for Jurassic Park were only known to a few people, such as Stan Winston, Roland Emmerich, and Cameron. These people did not disclose the information, so of course, Nicole would not know. I don't quite understand. What's the first phase? It's the first phase where I'll be personally involved. In the future, I'll put more effort into producing films. For example, I don't plan to personally direct the sequel to Jurassic Park anymore. I also plan to find other directors for the original disaster films. These films often have to be shot all over the world. I can't always leave Los Angeles for a few months every year. Of course, I'll still personally direct the films, but it depends on the specific situation. Nicole nodded and suddenly thought of something. Just as she was about to speak, the waiter served the dishes they ordered. Nicole's lips curled up as she watched the waitress serve Eric his food. She then eagerly asked Eric if he needed anything else. After the waitress left, she continued, I almost forgot something. You were the one who made the movie Interview with the Vampire at Night, weren't you? Yeah, why? Eric asked as he picked up the cutlery and fiddled with the base in front of him. Nicole said, Have the roles been decided? Night Interview with the Vampire is a collaboration between Firefly and David Geffen's production company. David Geffen has taken over the position of producer, and he's mainly in charge of this matter. Firefly is only checking on the script and budget for the time being. At present, the several main creators of the movie have not submitted the list of candidates for the cast. As Eric spoke, he thought of the two male leads in the original version of Interview with the Vampire. He looked at Nicole and asked, Did someone come to you, Tom Cruise? Nope. Tom Cruise is such an arrogant person. Why would he come to me to beg? Paula did talk to Peter about this matter. She hoped that Cruise could get the role, but Peter didn't ask us to help communicate this matter. Although Cruise's previous works weren't very good, he's still an A-list actor. Also, I heard that David Geffen is also interested in letting him play the male lead. When Nicole said the last sentence, she winked at Eric with a mischievous smile. Your thoughts are too evil, Eric said softly with a smile. Everyone knew that David Geffen was known as the most powerful homosexual in Hollywood, and Cruise's sexual orientation was 10 times more hidden than Hollywood's #1 closet actor, Kevin Spacey. Then, if it's not Tom Cruise, why are you bringing this up? It's an artist that Peter just signed. He's got good potential. Of course, we won't ask for the male lead. Peter wants him to try for the role of the second male lead. Eric joked. Men who play vampires have to be very handsome. You're actually speaking for such a person. Nicole smiled and waved her hand. You're also very handsome. He's my fellow countryman from Australia. Of course, I have to help him. Fellow countryman from Australia? I can't agree to this even more. Eric narrowed his eyes and dragged his voice. Nicole laughed a few more times and picked up a red cherry from her plate to put on Eric's plate. She said as if she was comforting a child. Okay, I'll give you a cherry. I'll take it that you've agreed. When I go back, I'll get Peter to call David Geffen and tell him that you've agreed. Eric picked the cherry into his mouth and said, Okay, you can arrange it as long as he can pass the audition. If he's not suitable, I'll definitely not agree. Of course. Nicole nodded. Eric looked at the almost finished lunch and said, What are you going to do in the afternoon? I just finished promoting Mr. and Mrs. Smith in Europe a few days ago. I've been taking a break recently. I'll stay in the studio to accompany you in the afternoon. Is that okay? No problem. I'm just about to edit a sample of Jurassic Park. You can help me. Then I'll learn a little. Maybe I can change my career to become a director in the future. Eric called the waiter over and handed him his credit card. Then he said to Nicole, Just be a good actress. Not everyone can be a director. It's not good to be greedy. Then why do you seem like you know everything? Nicole asked curiously as she held her chin with one hand. Of course, Eric couldn't tell the girl that he had studied directing for 4 years in his previous life. After graduation, he had been in the industry for nearly 20 years. Although he hadn't been able to shoot his own movie, after 20 years of accumulation, His basic skills were definitely very solid. At this time, facing Nicole's curious eyes, Eric raised his chin and said shamelessly, "I'm a genius. How can you small fries compare to me?" "Haha, you're so arrogant." Nicole laughed and threw a piece of tissue at him. The next day, of course, the tabloids were bustling with activity again. However, although Eric and Nicole were caught red-handed, neither of them made any response. They completely ignored the media's comments as long as the other party didn't cross the line. The production of Jurassic Park entered the final stage. Eric spent a long time every day in the post-production center of the studio. Nicole spent the next few days with Eric in the name of resting. When Eric was working, she was his temporary assistant. After work, the two of them went back to the Sharp Corner Manor together. In order to avoid trouble, Eric took a helicopter to and from work every day. The paparazzi gathered outside the Firefly Cineplex were hoping to get more explosive news, but after seeing the Black Bell 230 take off and land in the studio for a few days, they could only curse helplessly and slowly disperse. During the day, he had a woman to accompany him at night. Although he had to work overtime for a few hours every day for the post-production of Jurassic Park, Eric's days were still very comfortable. Occasionally, he would think that he had forgotten something, but he would quickly shake it off without a trace. Eric felt that if he forgot something, Alan, who was in charge of his schedule, would definitely remind him in time, so he didn't worry too much about it. After more than a week, Eric received a call from Kapoor again. Listening to Kapoor's complaints, Eric suddenly remembered that he had forgotten to meet with Charlize Theron. Chapter 5:15. After the Buffy audition, there was no news. According to the arrangement of her agent, Charlize Theron stayed in a motel in West Hollywood. Although the accommodation was not expensive, only $10 a day was enough to support her. From January until now, she had spent all her savings to prepare for the Buffy audition. If not for her agent, Michelle Simmons, hinting that there was an opportunity waiting for her that many actors might not encounter in their lifetime, she would have bought a plane ticket and flown back to New York. Even for the past few days, she had spent the $500 that Michelle Simmons had lent her. She waited for more than a week. Because of Michelle Simmons's repeated reminders, she almost never left the 2-kilometer radius of the motel. Fortunately, from the motel, about a kilometer to the north was the famous Walk of Fame. She would occasionally walk there, and like many pedestrians, she would bow her head and admire the stars inlaid on the road. Many people were curious or worshipping, but she often swore to herself that one day, she would leave her own star here. Eric Williams said that he wanted to see her. This was her biggest opportunity. During the Buffy audition, because the guy suddenly laughed and interrupted her performance, she hated him for a while. Then this hatred was severely extinguished by her agent. She used to only know that he was a big shot in Hollywood. In recent years, he was the hottest director and producer in Hollywood, and the boss of Firefly Films. Oh, he also had a very grand villa in Malibu. Because it looked like a shell, many people called it the Shell Villa. Some people called it the Freedom City. But after a few days of in-depth understanding, she knew what Eric Williams meant in Hollywood. Now in her hotel room, there was still the Premiere magazine that had been flipped through many times. He was the most powerful person in Hollywood in 1992. He was the big boss of Firefly Pictures, which had swallowed Disney. His personal wealth had exceeded $5 billion, and the movies he had shot in just 5 years had grossed more than $2 billion at the global box office. More importantly, he had personally made Julia Roberts, Nicolas Cage, Bridget Fonda, Nicole Kidman, Pierce Brosnan, and a large group of Hollywood actors who were originally unknown popular. Then he said that he would find time to meet her. Although she didn't know how her agent got her this opportunity, after understanding these things, Charlize Theron was so excited that she couldn't sleep well for several days. Whether it was day or night, she couldn't help but think about what to say and do during the meeting to attract his attention. Just like that, 1 day passed, 2 days passed, a week passed, and soon it would be 10 days. In the past few days, she even began to worry that Eric Williams had forgotten about it. She was worried about her gains and losses. She summoned the courage to take the initiative to call her agent for the first time. The reply, she was to be patient, but she was still keenly aware of the uncertainty in her agent's voice. She was to be patient, wait. The owner of the motel was a white fat man with a good heart. Seeing that a little girl like her had been idling in his shop for so many days, doing nothing but being careful with her spending, he kindly offered to introduce her to a job. Although she was very tempted, she still had to reject the other party. And it was impossible for a girl like her, who had won a modeling competition, not to attract the attention of others. A group of young men and women wandering in Hollywood invited her to some messy parties. Of course, she didn't dare to go. So when she met them these days, she always heard some strange words from the mouths of those people. And some of the men's eyes didn't hide their bad intentions. In the end, because of some small friction, she couldn't hold back and showed her shrewish nature. She had a big quarrel with the other party. Fortunately, the motel owner intervened and they didn't fight. After the argument, she felt a lingering fear. If they had really fought, her body, especially her face, would have been injured. Then, her chance would have been completely ruined. So she was even more anxious and depressed for the rest of the day. She closed the curtains and lay on the hard little bed in the dark room for an entire day. She even used lip gloss to fiercely draw on the face of the guy on the cover of Premiere magazine as if to vent her anger. She was too lazy to eat dinner. She planned to starve a page and save a few dollars. When the sky was getting dark, someone suddenly knocked on the door of the motel room. This had never happened before. She asked vigilantly, and the voice of her agent came from outside the door. She had some premonition in her heart. She jumped out of bed in a panic and ran barefoot to open the door. Charlie. Michelle Simmons' face was obviously filled with joy, but she had just called her name. She looked up and down at her appearance under the dim orange light in the corridor. She immediately frowned and scolded. "Look at you now." She touched the switch to turn on the light and let her agent in with a guilty conscience. Only then did Charles Theron explain, "Sorry, Michelle, I was just sleeping." Michelle Simmons looked around the room and saw the Premiere magazine on the edge of the bed. The cover was scribbled messily. However, she didn't say anything this time. She just frowned and sighed. "Charlie, pack up your things. We're leaving now." Charles Theron pulled down the shoulder straps of her light blue pajamas and subconsciously touched her messy hair. Her feet rubbed against each other on the cold floor a few times. She said nervously, Now, are we going to see him?" Michelle Simmons didn't answer. She sniffed and asked, "Have you not showered for a few days?" Looking at her awkward expression, Michelle Simmons could only say, "Forget it. Pack your things quickly. Come to my place tonight. The meeting is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon." After packing her simple luggage and paying the bill, Charles Theron got into a white car driven by her agent. After driving through the streets of Los Angeles for a while, they entered a densely packed residential area at the foot of Beverly Hills. Michelle Simmons quickly drove the car into the courtyard of a mansion. The two of them got out of the car. Charles Theron saw a tall bald man walk out of the living room with a smile on his face. "Kapoor, good evening." Michelle Simmons smiled and went forward. "Good evening, Michelle. You're here so soon." The bald man hugged Michelle Simmons before looking at Charles Theron, who was standing beside Michelle with a small suitcase. When their eyes met, Charles Theron smiled at the bald man, who nodded back at her. However, he quickly turned to Michelle Simmons and said, "I'm really sorry, Michelle. I called in the afternoon. It turns out that Eric really forgot. The post-production of Jurassic Park has entered the final stage. He has been working at least 12 hours a day these days. I hope you can understand. He even asked me to apologize to you in the afternoon." "It's okay. As long as Mr. Williams can spare the time, it's fine." Michelle Simmons shook her head and said without minding. When Charles Theron, who was standing behind Michelle, heard the bald man's words, she curled her lips in disdain. She remembered that she saw in the newspaper a few days ago that this guy and Nicole Kidman were leisurely having lunch together. The two of them looked so intimate in the photo. They didn't look busy at all. After Kapoor explained to Michelle Simmons, he turned to Charles Theron and said, "You must be Miss Theron. I'm Kapoor Sid. I've seen your information." Charlize Theron then remembered that the other party was one of the big bosses of ICM. She quickly let go of the lever in her hand and stepped forward to shake the other party's hand. "Hello, Mr. Sid. Just call me Charlie." Kapoor nodded and let go of Char's hand. He took a step back and sized her up. He nodded lightly and said, "You should smile more. You'll be more charming when you smile." Charlize Theron was a little surprised. A few years ago, when she participated in a modeling competition, a judge with a high reputation in the fashion industry had said something similar to her. Many female celebrities were more charming when they restrained their expressions. Once they smiled, they would lose their temperament. However, she was the opposite. When she was expressionless, she didn't even look beautiful. However, when she smiled, she immediately radiated charm. Charlize didn't expect the middle-aged man in front of her to be able to notice this on their first meeting. "I will, Mr. Sid." Charlize Theron nodded and said. The three of them entered the living room together. Kapoor asked the two of them to sit down and personally serve them coffee. He then said, "You can stay here temporarily until the matter is settled." "Thank you, Kapoor." Michelle Simmons nodded. Then she raised her voice slightly and said with a hint of something else, "When I leave, I'll personally return the key to Mary." "Heh, it's been so long and you still want to tease me with this matter?" Kapoor shook his head helplessly. He took out a document from a briefcase on the sofa and placed it on the coffee table. "Also, this is what you wanted. Take a look at it yourself. Try not to spread it. Even though this kind of thing is very common in the industry, it's not good for the person involved to know about it." "I understand." Michelle Simmons nodded and said, "What else?" Kapoor took out a business card and said, "This is the contact number of Eric's assistant. You can go to Firefly Studios in Praia Vista tomorrow at noon and contact him. Even though the meeting time is 12, it's best to go there early." Michelle nodded again. After telling them that, Kapoor thought for a moment and said, "The last time I called Eric, he said that he had thought of a good idea. I think it's an action movie with a female as the main character." After the success of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, everyone saw the potential of a female action movie. ICM has also been in contact with many similar projects recently, but none of them were major projects from major studios. They were only low-budget attempts by independent studios. Since Eric wants to do this kind of theme, it definitely won't be a small one. Kapoor glanced at Charlize Theron, who was holding a cup of coffee awkwardly, and said, "I saw in the information that you changed your career because of a knee injury, Charlie. Can you still perform more intense combat actions?" "Of course, Mr. Sid. I only considered changing my job because of that injury. However, that accident didn't leave any sequelae. That's for the best." Kapoor nodded and chatted with Michelle Simmons for a while. He finished his cup of coffee and got up to leave. In the blink of an eye, only the two of them were left in the villa. Charlize recalled Kapoor's words and felt a little excited. Then, she glanced at Michelle beside her and saw that she had picked up the document Kapoor left behind and was reading it. Charlize straightened her back and her eyes quickly fell on the document. However, just as she noticed the two striking words Eric Williams on the paper, she heard Michelle say, "This isn't something you should be reading. Go take a shower first. There's a bathroom upstairs. We'll talk later." Charlize, who was caught red-handed, felt her cheeks heat up. She quickly got up and slipped down the stairs with her small suitcase. After taking a shower, the two of them chatted about some matters. In order to prevent himself from appearing dispirited the next day, Charlize Theron forced himself to sleep, although he still couldn't remember having some messy dreams. Early the next morning, she was woken up by Michelle Simmons. The two of them had breakfast in a restaurant. Then Michelle brought Charlize to a famous shopping street in Beverly Hills. Charlize Theron looked at the familiar luxury brands on both sides of the street and looked at her agent with some apprehension. Michelle Simmons, who always had a serious expression, made a rare joke. "You have to have a good outfit. Today's outfit is my investment in you. If you become an A-list celebrity, don't kick me out." "How is that possible?" "I won't." Charlize Theron quickly shook her head and said. Michelle Simmons nodded slightly. She knew the character of the girl she had signed half a year ago very well. Charlize Theron was a woman with a strong personality, But she was also very realistic. If there was a better opportunity, she was sure that Charlize Theron would abandon her without hesitation. However, Michelle Simmons also believed that she could hold on to Charlize Theron tightly. Chapter 5:16. After spending more than an hour in a beauty shop, Charlize Theron finished her hair, put on the windbreaker she had chosen not long ago, and came to a full-length mirror. The girl in the mirror was wearing light makeup. Her originally light-colored long hair was dyed golden brown. The khaki windbreaker, black slim pants, and black knee-high boots made her body look even more slender. A beautician who had just served Charlize Theron looked at the girl in the mirror with some envy and complimented. "This lady is really beautiful, but I noticed that you don't seem to be wearing perfume. Maybe you can try the Miss Dior series of light perfume. It's fresh, elegant, and very suitable for your current temperament." Charlize Theron glanced at her agent standing next to her with a questioning look in her eyes. In the beginning, when she saw her agent casually spend a few $1,000s on a windbreaker, Charlize Theron was a little worried about how long it would take for her to pay back the money if she failed this time. Then, she gradually became numb to the expense after spending it again and again. Since she had already come to this point, she might as well go all out. Adding a bottle of perfume was nothing. Anyway, if she failed, she would definitely not be able to pay back the money. Michelle Simmons looked at Charlize Theron with satisfaction and nodded gently. When she heard the beautician's words, her face showed a moment of hesitation. Finally, she shook her head and said, "This is good. There's no need for perfume." Although Charlize Theron was a little puzzled, she didn't refute. From yesterday until now, from her manager's constant reminders of all kinds of things to take note of during the meeting, as well as her attire that made her look completely different from before, she could roughly guess the contents of the document with Eric Williams' name written on it last night. It must be that guy who did not like women wearing perfume. With that in mind, the two did not do anything else after paying the bill. They got into the car and drove straight to the Praia Vista community in the south of Culver City. It was only 10:30 when they arrived at Firefly Cineplex. Michelle parked the car in a parking lot outside the Cineplex. The two got out of the car and Charlize Theron couldn't help but look at the walls of Firefly Cineplex. Although there was a 2-meter-high wall blocking the view, the huge studio in the Cineplex still revealed its huge body. Michelle Simmons looked at her watch, but she didn't cross the road with Charlize Theron to the cinema. Instead, she found a coffee shop nearby. After ordering 2 cups of coffee and a stack of snacks, Michelle Simmons said, "Charlie, do you remember what I told you?" Charlize Theron recalled what Michelle Simmons had told him last night, and then slowly repeated it to his agent. Michelle Simmons waited for her to finish before nodding. "Very good, but there's one more thing. I know you're a smart girl, but in front of Mr. Williams, don't show your cleverness. Just be natural. If you really feel nervous, then you'd rather speak less than speak incoherently." Charlize Theron recalled the lazy face in the audition room more than a week ago. He felt that his agent was being too serious, but he still nodded obediently. "Do you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill?" Michelle Simmons looked at Charlize Theron's expression and suddenly asked. Charlize Theron shook his head in a panic. No. Don't think that it's a small matter. He became famous with a few movies at the age of 18. He has great power in Hollywood at such a young age. And he's also a director. No matter which one it is, it will make his character seem a little childish. Michelle Simmons paused. She didn't use the word childish and hesitated for a moment before saying, a little emotional. Perhaps it's just a little careless mistake that will make him feel that he doesn't like you. And just this little bit of dislike might cause you to lose your chance. It's not like this hasn't happened before. Rumor has it that during the audition for the female lead of The X-Files, 2 producers had their eyes on an actress, but he only gave a baffling, "I don't like this woman," and rejected her. Charlize Theron opened her mouth and listened to the industry gossip that Michelle Simmons casually revealed in surprise. She thought of the TV series The X-Files that she had also watched before and asked curiously in a low voice, "Michelle, I heard that the female lead of The X-Files is also his lover. Is that true?" Michelle Simmons glared at her and said, "That's not something you should be concerned about." Charlize Theron brushed the hair in front of her forehead. She was quite confident in her appearance. Looking at her agent's expression, she became worried again. Then if he wants me to do it, to be his, what should I do? If that's the case, you'll immediately become the object of envy of 99% of the female stars in Hollywood. You'll also have everything that ordinary people can't touch in a short period of time. You'll have the best material life, a dazzling career as a star, a high salary, and the best treatment. You won't have to submit to the rules of Hollywood, and you won't have to work so hard to maintain your status like other stars. As Michelle Simmons spoke, she saw the unconcealable yearning in the eyes of the girl opposite her, so she unceremoniously poured cold water on her. But you can rest assured that he probably doesn't have a crush on you. Charlize Theron couldn't help but let out an ah, and asked somewhat unwillingly, why? Michelle Simmons shrugged and said, who knows why? It's just like how we still haven't figured out why he suddenly laughed during the audition for Buffy. But with his personality, if he had a crush on you, he would have taken action when you attended the audition for Buffy. But the fact is, not only did that not happen, he even forgot to meet you. So, girl, the most important thing for you this time is to seize the opportunity that Kapoor mentioned. Don't think about anything else. Charlize Theron's shoulders slumped slightly, and a trace of disappointment appeared on her face. Michelle Simmons took a sip of coffee and quickly said, but you haven't forgotten what I told you on the phone that night, right? If he sends you an invitation in that way, remember, don't refuse. It's definitely good for you. There are countless female stars in Hollywood who want to climb into his bed, and he's not one of those old and ugly men. You won't lose out. Charlize Theron rolled her eyes slightly, but she didn't refute and nodded. The two of them spent time in a roadside coffee shop until 11:30. Michelle Simmons picked up her mobile phone and dialed the number of Eric's assistant. After talking for a while, she took Charlize Theron to Firefly Studios. The guards at the studio had also been instructed in advance. After confirming their identities, they handed 2 temporary passes to the two of them before letting them in. The main road of the park was very spacious, and there were many trucks, electric scooters, and exquisite nanny vans parked close to the studios on both sides. Near noon, many people came in and out of the open studio doors. Occasionally, a group of people could be seen escorting celebrities out of the studio and into the nanny vans. After walking for a few hundred meters, they passed through the studio area. Across a small square, a row of commercial lofts with steel frames and glass as the main body appeared in their field of vision. They continued walking until they finally arrived at the administrative area of the studio. Michelle Simmons made another call, and soon a young man in his 30s came out of an office building. After a few words of introduction, he said, Mr. Williams is already in the restaurant. Follow me. In addition to the large staff cafeteria, there were several relatively high-end specialty restaurants in the studio. After the scandal a week ago, Eric and Nicole did not go out to eat when they were in the studio. Instead, they chose one of the restaurants. After work in the morning, Eric looked at the time and took Nicole to the place where they often had lunch in advance. Eric was not in a hurry to order. Instead, he called Alan and began to draw on the sketchpad he brought from the office. Looking at Eric, who was quickly drawing on the sketchpad beside her, Nicole could not help but ask, do you really not need me to leave for a while? Eric looked up at Nicole and smiled. No, I asked Alan to bring the girl and her agent here. We just want to meet, have a meal together, and have a casual chat. At this time, Nicole also knew the ins and outs of the matter. She nodded and looked at the sketchpad in Eric's hand. In the background that looked like a flame, there were 3 valiant figures standing. What is this? The concept art of the Thunderbolt girls in your plan? Eric nodded. When he saw Nicole's face coming closer, he moved the sketchpad towards her and continued to add lines with the pencil in his hand. He explained, Yes, I plan to completely adapt the Charlie's Angels TV series. If it's feasible, I want to make it into a female secret agent series like 007. Eric was not very fond of the original Thunderbolt Girls series. Not only was the original plot scattered, but there were also too many traces of music video. It was said that the director at that time, Joseph Mike Nicher, was originally a music video director. However, he did not change his career path like David Vinci and Michael Bay did. Therefore, there were a lot of scenes similar to music video in Thunderbolt Girls. If it were not for the original's real-life special effects and a series of gimmicks such as female action movies, the movie's box office success was not high. Therefore, the series came to an abrupt end after listing 2 movies, and could not be restarted for a long time. The subsequent TV series remake also ended in failure. Now that the control of the series was in his hands, Eric was not only not going to follow the original style, but also had a bigger ambition. That was to make this story into a longer series of action movies. Even if it could not catch up with the classic 007 series, he would work hard in this direction. 007 has already filmed 16 movies. It's not that easy to develop a similar series of movies. Frank Marcheso, who has just taken over MGM, recently plans to restart 007's 17th movie. They have already sent me an invitation to ask if I have the intention to play the role of Bond girl. Nicole's casual words gave Eric an idea. He turned his head and looked at the girl from head to toe. Nicole was confused and shrank her neck back. She laughed and said, "Haha, haven't you seen it? I thought you were starting to get tired of it." Eric stuck his head out and kissed the girl's lips. He said with a smile, "How is that possible? I just suddenly thought of a good idea." "Oh," Eric said, "since 007 has a Bond girl, then there should also be a more typical villain in Thunderbolt. Let's call her Fallen Angel." "Fallen Angel? Don't tell me you want me to play it?" "Bingo, the first Fallen Angel. What do you think?" "Nothing much. Since you want to develop a new series, the 3 female leads you chose shouldn't be too famous. If I'm the villain, even if I have to face 3 girls, I'll be able to suppress them in all aspects. When the time comes, the audience will focus on me, and the movie will definitely lose its balance," Nicole said confidently. Eric also quickly realized this problem. The recent Mr. and Mrs. Smith had successfully created a strong queen's aura for Nicole. According to his plan, the 3 new actresses would definitely be difficult to suppress. Since the first movie is not good, then the second one will be good. It just so happens that we can use the first movie to make the series famous, and then use the second to strengthen the reputation of Fallen Angel. The subsequent series development will be smoother. "That's more like it. I can give it a try when the time comes." Nicole nodded. Just as they were chatting, Alan led Charlize Theron and Michelle Simmons into the restaurant. Nicole's gaze paused for a moment on Michelle Simmons, who was wearing a black suit and had short hair. Then she moved to Charlize Theron and sized him up. Suddenly, she smiled and whispered into Eric's ear, "Your food." "I haven't ordered my food yet," Eric replied softly and stood up. "Hello, Mr. Williams. I'm Michelle Simmons. Nice to meet you." Michelle Simmons walked over and extended her hand to Eric enthusiastically. Then she greeted Nicole and quickly gave her seat to Charlize Theron. "Miss Theron, we meet again." This time, it was Eric who took the initiative to greet her. He also sized up the lucky person in front of him in the original space-time, who was on the assembly line of the Hollywood movie industry. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Mobile users, please read it at M. Chapter 517. Charlize Theron's rise to fame in the original space-time was very typical. The South African girl, who had no roots and no foundation, went to the City of Angels like many young men and women with dreams of being a star. After spending 2 years in Hollywood, she attracted the attention of the circle with a thriller film, 2 Days in the Valley, which was a parody of Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. With her acting skills and appearance recognized, she began to play the role of a vase in various types of films. After a few years of hard work, she became a quasi-A-list actress. Later, she relied on her large-scale self-destructive performance in She-Devil to win the Best Actress Oscar, and successfully became an A-list actress. Then she began to receive invitations to be the female lead in commercial blockbusters such as Hancock, Snow White and the Huntsman from mainstream film studios. Of course, luck played a big part in the whole process. The reason why Charlize Theron could become an A-list actress in Hollywood and obtain the title of South Africa's Beautiful Diamond was not only because of her acting skills and appearance, but also because she never took the wrong path. Eric remembered that in the original Spacetime, Charlize Theron had participated in the audition for the female lead in Paul Van Hoven's No Beautiful Women, which was criticized by many. Fortunately, she failed in the end. Elizabeth Berkley, who got the role, had a good career in Hollywood. However, after the movie was released, due to the bad reviews of the movie, not only was her acting career ruined, even her agent had abandoned her. After the few of them introduced themselves and sat down at the table, Michelle Simmons relaxed. At the same time, she had to be alert. She originally thought that Eric planned to have lunch with Charlize Theron alone, so she put all her attention on Charlize and did not prepare much for this meeting. She did not expect that Eric's assistant would suddenly say that Eric had asked her and Charlize to come together. She also did not expect that Nicole Kidman would be sitting next to Eric. The waiter handed over the menu, but Eric just put it aside. He ignored the reserved Charlize Theron and took the initiative to ask Michelle Simmons. "Michelle, are you good friends with Kapoor?" "Yes, Mr. Williams. Kapoor, his wife Mary, and I were classmates in college. We have known each other for almost 20 years. No wonder," Eric said with a smile. He sized up the short-haired woman in a suit and did not continue to inquire about her relationship with Kapoor. "Kapoor said that you had always been in the television business. Why did you suddenly change to a movie agent?" "I feel that my personal development in the television industry has reached a bottleneck, so I want to try my hand in the film industry," Michelle Simmons replied. Nicole had ordered lunch for Eric and herself. She took the menu and whispered to Eric, "Eric, do you think these are okay?" When Michelle Simmons saw Eric approach Nicole intimately, she quickly took the opportunity to order her lunch from the waiter. Charlize Theron, who was sitting beside her, also ordered the same dishes as her agent. Looking at the two of them discussing in low voices, Eric said something, and Nicole even let out a soft chuckle. Charlize Theron smacked Eric, feeling a faint sense of envy and unwillingness to be ignored. However, he didn't dare to express anything out of the ordinary. "All right, that's all. I still have work in the afternoon, so I don't want any alcohol. Juice will do." Eric said one last sentence before he turned his gaze to Michelle Simmons again. "You should have a lot of TV series actors in your hands, right?" Michelle Simmons replied, "Yes, the actor of Walter Narkins in The X-Files, Mitpeg, is my client. I also have 7 other clients, all of whom play important roles in different TV series." Walter Narkins's identity in The X-Files was the assistant to the director of the Bureau of Investigation. He had once gone through life and death with the 2 leads. Although this character only appeared in the 2nd season of The X-Files, he was a major supporting role that was second only to the 2 leads in the planned number of episodes. The fact that he only appeared in the 2nd season was also a very important factor. It was often more difficult to get such an important role in a TV series that had already proven its viewership than the leads in the new American TV series. Of course, Michelle Simmons didn't say this to show off. It was more to get closer to Eric. After all, Eric was the creator of the X-Files series. But at the same time, this also proved Michelle Simmons's outstanding ability. Developing as a film agent is indeed a good choice, but it shouldn't be so easy to take care of both sides, right? "I'll arrange it," Michelle Simmons said confidently. She had also made up her mind that if everything went well in Hollywood, she would transfer her clients to other agents. This was a very easy choice to make. The waiter quickly served lunch, and the few of them talked less. However, Michelle Simmons found that Eric was talking to her most of the time, and did not talk much with Charlize Theron. This made her feel a little uneasy. After all, she was here to promote her clients this time. After lunch, the coffee was served. Eric looked at his watch and said to Nicole beside him, "Nicole, show Miss Theron around the park. I have something to discuss with Michelle alone." Charlize Theron was disappointed and a little confused when he heard this sentence. However, Michelle Simmons came back to her senses at this time. Eric had been asking about her work situation before, probably to test her work ability. Since he had sent the other 2 away at this time, he must have more important cooperation to discuss with her. Nicole did not quite understand why Eric suddenly said this, but she still got up obediently and pulled Charlize Theron affectionately. "Charlie, let's go. I'll show you around the park. Maybe you'll come here often in the future." Charlize Theron could only smile obediently and obediently followed Nicole out of the restaurant. When they reached the door, he could not help but stop and look back. Nicole looked at the girl who still had some baby fat on her face, patted her on the shoulder, and said softly, "Don't worry. You shouldn't have made this trip in vain." Charlize Theron looked at Nicole's expression and wanted to explain in a panic. However, the words that came out of his mouth turned into a question. "Miss Kidman, really?" "You'll know when you get back," Nicole replied with a smile. Then she ignored Charlize Theron's clumsy probing and brought her around the studio like a hostess. These days, she had basically stayed in the studio with Eric during the day. She was also more familiar with this film and television base that was even larger than Universal Burbank Studios. The more she learned, the more she could feel the powerful strength that Firefly Pictures had accumulated in just a few years. After Nicole and Charlize left, Eric handed the sketch that he had hurriedly drawn before the meal to Michelle Simmons and said, "I think you should have heard some news from Kapoor. This is a concept sketch that I drew before you came over." Michelle Simmons took it and saw the silhouettes of 3 women sketched with a pencil on the paper. Although the sketch was very sloppy, she could immediately feel the heroic spirit of the 3 women. In 1976, ABC TV launched a TV series called Charlize's Angels. Because of the feminist trend it advocated, it was very popular at that time. "I wonder if you've seen it before?" Michelle Simmons nodded and said, "I've seen some of it. At that time, I also liked this TV series very much." "That's for the best. I've already bought the movie adaptation rights of this TV series. I plan to change it into a female action movie series. The style is similar to the 007 series," Eric said and pointed to the seat where Charlize Theron had just sat. "Charlize can be counted as one. At present, I still lack 2 female leads." Michelle Simmons was a little tempted, but she was not too sure. She asked, "Mr. Williams, are you saying that you want me to find 2 more female leads for this movie?" "Yes, because it's a new series. I hope to use newcomers who are about the same age as Charlize Theron. However, their acting skills must be good enough," Eric said and stretched out 2 fingers. 2 months. Are you willing to take this job?" Michelle Simmons hesitated for a moment. This was definitely a good opportunity for her, but it was easier said than done to find a newcomer with good acting skills. After a moment of silence, Michelle Simmons seemed to have thought of something and asked tentatively, "Mr. Williams, how about this? It's not easy to find girls who meet your requirements in North America. However, I can try in Europe and find some actresses who have already made a name for themselves in Europe, but don't have any influence in North America. This way, I can judge their acting skills based on their works and basically meet your requirements." Eric thought for a moment and nodded. "Not bad. This is indeed a good idea. Let's do it according to your method." "Then, Mr. Williams, do you have any other requests?" Eric thought for a moment and felt that there was no need to imitate the original version and use female stars of different races to please different races. He said, "In addition to being beautiful, I hope that they have their own characteristics. This is because what I want to create is not the 3 silly and sweet female vase stars in the TV version, but a female agent movie with a distinct character. In my idea, they have different pasts, skills, and distinct personalities. Also, after signing the contract, they will first undergo physical training for at least 3 months. You can tell them this in advance. The training will be very strict. If they can't stand it, it's best not to join." Michelle Simmons smiled and said, "I don't think any girl will be stupid enough to quit your movie, Mr. Williams." Eric shook his head. "I don't plan to direct this series, but I will participate in the script writing. In Hollywood, who doesn't know that as long as you participate in a movie, it's your movie, whether or not you will personally direct it?" "Thank you for your compliment, Michelle," Eric said with a smile. "This is definitely not a compliment, but a fact." "Okay." Eric smiled and raised his wrist to look at his watch. "Then let's call it a day. I still have work in the afternoon." The 2 stood up, and Eric extended his hand to Michelle Simmons again. Happy working with you. Michelle Simmons smiled and extended her hand. Happy working with you. I can't take you into these two studios. These are the most advanced virtual digital studios in Hollywood. They are dedicated to shooting special effects scenes. The cost of this studio alone is more than $20 million, twice as expensive as ordinary studios. The equipment inside is even more expensive. Many of them are specially developed in the digital field and can't be seen on the market. Nicole pointed to a studio beside her that was specially equipped with security guards and introduced it to Charles Theron with a little pride. As she spoke, the handbag hanging on her elbow buzzed. She quickly took out her mobile phone to answer the call. After a few simple words, Nicole said to Charles Theron, "They're done talking. Let's go back." Charles Theron, who was already a little absent-minded, immediately perked up when he heard this. He followed Nicole to the administrative district. After saying goodbye, Eric specially sent an electric car to send the two women out of the studio. Then he walked with Nicole to the post-production center. "What did you talk about?" Nicole finally couldn't hold back and asked curiously. Eric said, "Aren't there 3 female leads in Whopper of Charming Dolls? I also gave the task of finding the other 2 angels to Michelle Simmons." Nicole said in surprise, "Then, aren't you afraid that when the movie becomes popular in the future, she will use the 3 female leads to threaten Firefly to offer a higher price?" Eric said without the slightest worry, "You should also be able to see that this is a very smart woman. She won't do such a stupid thing that lacks foresight. Moreover, if the 3 female leads belong to different managers or agencies, once the movie is successful, it will be more troublesome to negotiate the sequel. Of course, I will let Firefly draft the contract in advance. At least, I will ensure that the female leads won't cause too much trouble in the trilogy." Nicole asked, "Didn't you say that you want to imitate the 007 series? What about after the trilogy?" For such a big-budget movie series, the trilogy will take at least 5 to 6 years. Who knows what will happen by then? At most, the series will be rebooted and the female lead will be changed. Didn't 007 also change many male leads? Chapter 5:18. The electric scooter sent them all the way to the entrance of the cinema. As soon as they walked out of the cinema, Charlize Theron couldn't wait to ask, "Michelle, is there a result?" Michelle Simmons nodded. "Let's talk about it in the car." Seeing Michelle Simmons' action, Charlize Theron finally felt relieved. After a moment of excitement, it was followed by a faint sense of loss. For this meeting, she had prepared for so long and even owed a small debt to her agent. She didn't expect that during the whole process, Eric Williams would only say some polite words to her. He didn't even look at her too much. People's minds were often like this. Although Charlize Theron seemed to obey her agent's arrangements on the surface, she still had her own little calculations in private. However, she didn't even have a chance to implement these little schemes during the whole meeting. The two of them got in the car. Michelle Simmons was also thinking about her own matters. It wasn't until the car drove out of Santa Monica that she realized that Charlize Theron hadn't spoken for a long time. "Are you a little disappointed?" Michelle Simmons glanced at Charlize Theron in the passenger seat. Charlize Theron subconsciously wanted to deny it, but when she saw her agent smile, she nodded slightly. "I didn't make it clear just now. It's like this." After organizing her words, Michelle Simmons said, "Mr. Williams said that he had seen your performance in the Buffy audition. It was not bad, so you have successfully got the role. However, there are a total of 3 female leads in that movie, and you are only one of them." Charlize Theron showed a happy expression to her agent. However, Michelle Simmons still saw the disappointment of the girl next to her and explained, "This is a movie that is absolutely centered around the female lead. The investment scale is comparable to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and it is personally directed by Eric Williams. So you should be grateful for your luck. If this movie publicly recruited the female lead, it would be enough to make all the actresses of the right age in Hollywood go crazy. In that case, you wouldn't have any chance at all." Then, Charlize Theron thought for a moment and asked, From what happened today, since he's not interested in me, how did I get the role? Who knows? Maybe you just happened to be there. Michelle Simmons had also thought of this problem. Although she was somewhat puzzled, she didn't have any intention of delving deeper. Perhaps other than Eric Williams himself, no one knew why. As for what the other party was thinking, she had no intention of personally asking. As she spoke, Michelle Simmons saw a large Blockbuster video rental store by the side of the road. She parked the car by the side of the road and walked in with Charlize Theron. After searching for a while, Michelle Simmons found a complete set of videotapes of the television series version of Charlie's Angels. She didn't choose to rent it but bought it directly. Although she had watched this television series before, it was more than 10 years ago. Since she had accepted the task of choosing the female lead, Michelle Simmons planned to watch the television series carefully and do her job carefully. When Charlize Theron saw the figures of the three hot girls on the videotape box, she understood that she might be acting in the movie version of this television series. Charlie's Angels was a television series that aired in 1976. At that time, Charlize Theron had just been born and lived far away in a small farm in South Africa. It was impossible for her to come into contact with such things. The two of them carried the bag full of videotapes back to the car. Michelle Simmons drove and continued the original topic. Anyway, you've got the role now, so there's no need to find out why you got it. After all, you don't have anything that others can covet. If Eric Williams wants something from you, there's no need to beat around the bush. So just do what you have to do. Charlize Theron held a videotape in her hand and looked at the text summary on the back of the videotape. Hearing her agent's words, she said, "Then what should I do next?" Michelle Simmons thought for a moment and said, "I remember that you don't have a driver's license, right? In the next 2 months, learn how to drive first and get your license. This is an action movie, so you'll definitely come into contact with driving scenes. I also need to leave Los Angeles for a while. After 2 months, your schedule will be arranged by the film company. Williams said that you'll undergo 3 months of training." Speaking of this, Michelle Simmons added on Eric's original words. He said that the 3 months of training will be very difficult and strict. If you can't take it, it's best to quit first. Of course, Charlize Theron couldn't quit. However, she caught the other meaning in her agent's words. "Did you just say we?" Michelle Simmons didn't expect Charlize Theron to be so sensitive. She said, "Yes, you. Besides you, I still have to look for the other 2 girls. According to Williams' request, I need to go to Europe. If everything goes well, it should be quick. It won't take more than 2 months. This is the deadline he gave." Then what should I do? Charlize Theron didn't have the time to think about the other 2 competitors in the future. If her manager left, she definitely wouldn't be able to stay in Kapoor Sid's mansion in Beverly Hills, and the money in her card wouldn't be enough to live in Los Angeles for 2 months. Michelle Simmons also understood Charlize Theron's meaning. She said, "I'll arrange it for you. The expenses will be deducted from your salary in the future. Before you leave, I'll sign your contract with Firefly. Then you'll have an official contract." Ever since she was signed by Michelle Simmons last fall, this was the first time Charlize Theron heard the word salary being associated with her. This time, she was really excited. "Michelle, how much will my salary be?" Michelle Simmons tapped her fingers on the steering wheel and thought for a moment. She said, "For this kind of big production, even if you're a newcomer, your salary shouldn't be too little. However, the salary of female stars is usually lower than that of male stars. Moreover, Charlie's Angels has 3 female leads. So, I'll have to contact them to know the exact salary. I'm guessing your salary should be between $100,000 to $200,000. Of course, if the movie is a big hit in the future, the producers will definitely give you some extra rewards." There was one more thing that Michelle Simmons didn't mention. Among the 3 female leads in the plan, Charlize Theron's salary should be the lowest. The other 2 female leads were planned to use female stars who had already made a name for themselves in Europe. So even if they didn't have much influence in North America, their salary would be correspondingly higher. Although this figure was a far cry from the multimillion-dollar movie stars she often saw in magazines, Charlize Theron was still very satisfied. At least this was a good start. She wasn't the kind of person who would bite off more than she could chew. Moreover, this amount of money should be enough for her to not have to worry about trivial things like making a living for a long time. She could focus on preparing for the movie. A few days later, Michelle Simmons signed the contract with Firefly on behalf of Charlize Theron. Although she and Charlize Theron were a little confused about the unfamiliar production company, Flower Pictures, the $200,000 salary was still a surprise to both of them. Although this number was nothing compared to the production cost that was destined to exceed $50 million, it was the best-case scenario that Michelle had expected. However, perhaps because of this relatively generous salary, there was also an option contract attached to the contract. After Charlize Theron starred in the first movie of Charlize Theron, he would have to star in 2 more sequels within the next 5 years. At the beginning of March, after the last period of intense work, Eric successfully completed all the post-production work for Jurassic Park. After watching the movie, Eric was full of confidence in the movie's box office prospects. Compared to the version in his memory, except for the same ups and downs, this version of Jurassic Park was even better than the original version in terms of special effects. After all, the movie in the original spacetime was Spielberg's work after the failure of Captain Hawk. Although it was a great success in the end, during the production process, the movie company wasn't 100% confident. Therefore, the budget was tighter and many details couldn't be perfected 100%. However, Eric's version of the movie burned $75 million in the project budget alone, with the idea that if you want to do a good job, you have to use the best tools possible. In order to provide special effects technical support for this series, Digital Domain had been conducting the corresponding technical research and development since it was first established. In the process, they also spent a lot of money. After Jurassic Park was completed, the movie's marketing plan was quickly launched. A week later, Firefly released the first poster for Jurassic Park. Disney's theme stores also began to decorate Jurassic Park merchandise. With hundreds of Disney's merchandise stores all over North America and Europe, as long as the movie was successful, Firefly Pictures would be able to make a profit from the merchandise sales in the shortest time possible. Firefly had a total of 3 movies during the summer: Jurassic Park, Collision, and The Bug Crisis. Eric was well aware of the box office power of Jurassic Park. In order not to affect the box office of the other 2 movies, Jurassic Park was released on June 4th. Then on June 25th, The Bug Crisis, which was completely different from Jurassic Park, was released again. Collision, which was also a special effects movie, was released on July 2nd. Although the box office power of Jurassic Park was still there, it wouldn't have much of an impact on Collision. In the past few years, the movies released by Firefly had become the focus of attention of other film companies. Many people noticed something unusual after Firefly announced the release schedule. Previously, Firefly's release schedule had always been to release different films in 2 weeks intervals during the popular period. But if you didn't consider The Bug Crisis, a 3D animation released by Firefly's subsidiary Disney, the 2 movies released by Firefly this summer were released a whole month apart. Almost everyone quickly realized that Firefly must be very optimistic about Jurassic Park. Last year's global box office of nearly $700 million was still fresh in the minds of many people in Hollywood. Firefly obviously valued Jurassic Park more than Tornado. Due to various considerations, some of the more flexible second- and third-tier film companies directly chose to postpone their summer release in order to avoid Jurassic Park. As for the big film companies, Michael Eisner was also pressured by Universal executives to postpone The Fugitive, which was originally planned to be released at the end of June, to the middle of July. It was swapped with a mid-budget romance film. Although many people publicly criticized Michael Eisner for being too cautious, Michael Eisner insisted that he didn't explain too much to others. When Eric heard the news, he was a little impressed by Michael Eisner's courage. If Michael Eisner insisted on The Fugitive because he was afraid of losing face, then there would be a good show to watch. Some people took the initiative to retreat. Of course, there were also people who didn't believe it. There were even 2 movies that wanted to pincer attack Jurassic Park. These two movies were Wind of the Mountains starring Stallone and Last Action Hero, starring Schwarzenegger. Both movies were produced by German-funded Karlock Film. One was scheduled to be released a week before Jurassic Park, and the other was scheduled to be released a week after Jurassic Park. Eric had long noticed these two big flops, so he asked the production department to temporarily postpone the salary negotiation with Arnold Schwarzenegger for True Lies. He didn't expect these two movies to go head-to-head with Jurassic Park, without hesitation. After finishing the post-production of Jurassic Park, Eric didn't have time to rest. A series of tedious things needed to be handled by him personally. Under David Geffen's recommendation, the male lead of Interview with the Vampire at Night was finally determined to be Tom Cruise. The second male lead was taken by an Australian actor under Pi Kingsley. Eric didn't have any information about the actor named Jack Slater in his memory. It was probably the result of the butterfly effect. In terms of the actors, the only thing Eric intervened was to find Kirsten Dunst, who was said to have the soul of a 35-year-old. The little girl was only 11 years old at this time, but the results of the audition were very satisfactory to the directors, including Neil Jordan. Chapter 519. After collaborating with Columbia on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, according to the original contract, there were still plans to collaborate on 4 other movies. After getting the juicy Columbia overseas distribution resources, Eric no longer had much enthusiasm. However, after Eric completed the post-production of Jurassic Park, Peter Guber kept pestering him. Not only did he call him a few times a day, but he also went to Firefly's headquarters or the Pointy Corner Manor every few days. Eric had no choice but to start selecting the remaining projects. After all, Firefly had 60% of the profits, and he couldn't just pick a few movies to deal with it. That would be equivalent to cheating himself. Just thinking about it gave him a headache. The salary negotiation between Nicole and Universal for the Mummy project was also successfully completed. Nicole gave up $10 million in exchange for an 8% share of the profits of the Mummy. Eric heard that this contract also caused a lot of controversy within Universal. Michael Eisner wanted to pay Nicole in cash, but in order to reduce the investment risk, Universal's board of directors insisted on agreeing to Nicole's share of the profits. In the end, they even brought in the higher-ups of Panasonic. Michael Eisner had no choice but to agree under the pressure of Panasonic's higher-ups. After Eric saw the outline of the Mummy series drawn up by Universal, he confirmed that the second sequel would have an army of the undead. Therefore, he asked Digital Domain to take the initiative to contact Universal, wanting to take over the special effects production project of the Mummy series. Because Eric didn't care about the cost of technology research and development, Industrial Light and Magic was far behind Digital Domain in terms of CG special effects. Although Michael Eisner had reached a long-term cooperation agreement with Industrial Light and Magic with Spielberg's help, he couldn't refuse Digital Domain's request to cooperate. After all, he couldn't refuse to make Universal's movies look better in terms of special effects. However, Michael Eisner didn't give all the special effects of the Mummy to Digital Domain. Instead, he subcontracted the special effects to Industrial Light and Magic and Digital Domain. Eric was only interested in the special effects of the Army of the Undead, so he didn't raise any objections. The sale of TG Film Company to Fox was only to confirm the intention. The specific deal would only be implemented after TG completed this year's project. Drew and Elizabeth still focused on the production of Buffy and Jim Carrey's new film. The episode with Charlize Theron didn't affect the progress of Buffy, determining the female lead. If everything went well, the TV series would start production at the end of March. After a period of research, Jim Carrey's new film was confirmed to be the sequel to Detective Airplane at the end of last year. In the original space-time, the sequel did much better than the first one. Eric also stepped in and gave some suggestions for the script. Because TG Film Company wasn't in a hurry to sell, Drew couldn't leave in a short period of time. The production of Thunderbolt Girls wasn't in a hurry. Eric originally planned to hand over the script of Thunderbolt Girls to the scriptwriter team at Firefly. However, after thinking about it, he decided to do it himself. Anyway, because of the birth of the two little guys, he would definitely have some free time in New York. During this time he could slowly come up with the script for Thunderbolt Girls. Since the idea was to imitate the 007 series, Thunderbolt Girls needed a complete world and story background. In this regard, Eric, who had countless movie plots in his mind, was definitely better than anyone else. Therefore, during this period of time, Eric had been carrying a small notebook with him. He would record down the inspiration that came to him from time to time about Thunderbolt charming dolls. In between these trivial matters, Forbes magazine would also add to the mess. At the beginning of March, Forbes magazine officially announced their annual list of the 400 richest people in North America. Although Eric didn't appear on the list, his net worth of $7.5 billion still attracted a lot of attention from the media. After all, although Eric's wealth wasn't the highest on the list, his age was very eye-catching. After his birthday in May, Eric was only 23 years old. Even Bill Gates, who had a net worth of more than $5 billion, couldn't compare with him. Although Bill Gates was once called the youngest billionaire, he would be 40 years old in 2 years. Of course, if it was just his age, it wouldn't be a big problem. But as for the source of Eric's wealth, although Forbes magazine gave a clear analysis, many media still had all kinds of malicious speculations. Some people even strongly called for the federal government to conduct a related investigation and give the taxpayers an explanation. Of course, there was no explanation, but it was certain that there would be controversy. In this chaotic environment, Eric was busy until the end of March. After he finished all his work, he hurriedly left everything behind and rushed to New York. In East Hampton, Long Island, because the two women were going to live there for a long time, the rented house had been canceled. In January, Eric asked Chris, who was in New York, to help him buy a small 5-acre manor not far from the sea. When he came to New York again, Virginia and Joanna had already moved in. At the end of March, the weather in New York was still cold. Although it didn't snow again, the highest temperature still didn't exceed 15 degrees, and occasionally dropped below zero. Eric didn't feel at a loss like many workaholics when he suddenly came to this small manor, which was like a paradise. Instead, he enjoyed the sudden tranquility very much. For the two women now, it was definitely not suitable for them to go out in the morning and evening. They would only go out for a walk when the weather was warm at noon. It was a rare sunny day in New York. There was no wind, and staying under the sun gave people a warm feeling. At this time, Eric was standing on the lawn, which was just a little green, with a drawing folder in front of him and a charcoal pencil in his hand. He was whispering to himself as he drew Joanna, who was sitting quietly on the bench in front of him, on the white paper. The woman said that she wanted to keep it as a souvenir and show the little guy how his mother looked when she was pregnant. Because of the nourishment during pregnancy, Joanna's cheeks were not as thin as before. She looked plump and pretty, and with her charming eyes, she looked even more beautiful. As for Virginia, she absolutely wouldn't allow Eric to make any comments about her round face. The little woman also noticed that Eric was also looking forward to the little guy in her belly, so she was even more fearless. The sound of a car came, but Eric didn't look back. Before he came to New York, Chris said that he would visit with his girlfriend, and he called last night to tell him about it. Not far away, Virginia and Chris' voices could be heard. After exchanging a few words, they walked towards Eric's direction. Eric saw Joanna slightly raise her chin and smile behind him. He turned his head and saw that the three people had already arrived behind him. "Eric, your drawing is so beautiful," Emily Brighton said with some envy. She used to be very interested in drawing, but unfortunately, she had to apply for business school in order to take over the family business. Chris joked, "Yeah, if you don't plan to be a director in the future, you can also rely on this skill to make a living." Virginia looked at the drawing that was about to be completed and felt a little jealous. However, she was determined not to leave any image because she felt that this was the ugliest period of her life. Thinking of this, Virginia subconsciously glared at Eric and vented her little resentment on Eric. "It's all this guy's fault for sure." Emily and Chris, who were standing on the other side, both noticed Virginia's expression and snickered, but they didn't say anything. Eric carefully sketched the lines and listened to Chris's teasing. He smiled and said, It's not like I can't consider your opinion. Anyway, I have nothing to do recently, so I can go to Times Square and earn some money to buy a few packets of milk powder for the two little guys. Of course, this was a joke. After a few words, Virginia pulled Emily to prepare lunch. During Eric's absence, Emily often came to visit the two girls, and the three of them had become very good friends. Chris didn't leave. He put his hands in the pockets of his coat and watched Eric draw. He asked, "How long do you plan to stay in New York this time?" "If there's nothing else, I'll try to stay until the summer break," Eric thought and said with some uncertainty. Chris smiled and said, "Judging from your tone, I bet you won't stay that long." Eric also shook his head gently. "It can't be helped. Speaking of which, I envy many other people in the same industry. They can take a few months of vacation every year. I heard that the boss of Telcom, John Malone, only works for 6 months a year and takes his family around the world for a vacation for the rest of the year." Telcom was a major shareholder of QVC, which was controlled by Barry Diller. Eric had been paying attention to the bidding between QVC and Viacom for Paramount, so he happened to hear this anecdote. They are all old men, and they are successful. Of course, they can live comfortably. Also, they are not like you. You are only 23 years old, and you are in the top 10 of the Forbes World's Billionaires list. Eric sighed slightly. Yes, there are gains and losses. I hope the two of them won't be too unfamiliar with me in the future. Chris didn't know how to continue the topic. He thought for a while and said, "Speaking of the Forbes rich list, I have registered several companies in Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, and other places. In the future, we can invest in several companies through these offshore companies and gradually dilute Firefly's shares in these companies. I have recently begun to talk to Steve Case about AOL shares. The 30% shares we now own can also be distributed among several foundations. In this way, Firefly can become an empty shell that won't appear on the list of listed companies' shareholders in the future." "That's good. I was blocked by those paparazzi in Los Angeles a few days ago. Some of them even fanned the flames. It was really annoying." Chris smiled and said, "Even if we hide Firefly's investment, if Firefly Pictures continues to develop at the current speed, you will be pushed to the top of the list sooner or later." Now, many people have already questioned Forbes magazine's underestimation of Firefly Pictures' market value. Wall Street even scoffed at the valuation made by Forbes. "Let's talk about it when the time comes. At worst, I will split Firefly Pictures shares," Eric said. Suddenly, he thought of something and asked, "How's the Hotmail online mailbox? I haven't seen any news on the recent documents." "They are already building the server," Chris said with a helpless expression. "The core code for the online mailbox has almost been completed. Steve Mitnick is not satisfied with the way the mailbox password is encrypted. He led his team to develop a new encryption algorithm. This time, if there are no other accidents, it will be used in April. However, I have been keeping an eye on the internet market. So far, I haven't found any technology companies that are researching similar technologies. So, we can wait a little longer. Even if there are competitors, with the IE and Yahoo portals in our hands, we can promote it much faster than them." Eric nodded. He was getting more and more interested in the guy who was also called Steve. He said, "If you have time, you must meet him. I'm most interested in perfectionists and paranoid people, especially those who can persist in their perfectionism." Chris curled his lips and said, "When you see him, you might have the urge to beat him up." After finishing the painting, it was almost lunchtime. Eric took down the drawing board and walked to Joanna, who was sitting on the bench. He whispered a few words with the woman. The two then said goodbye to Chris and went straight to the villa. Chris looked at the backs of the two people and the lonely easel on the lawn. He shrugged helplessly and scolded Eric for being inhumane. Then he rolled up his sleeves, took the easel apart and followed them. During lunch, the dining room became the home of the three women. Women were naturally talkative creatures. Coupled with the fact that Emily was already very familiar with the two women, she was also very talkative. During lunch, she chatted with the two women about the birth of the little ones until 18 years later. After lunch, she still wanted to continue. Leaving Eric and Chris behind, She gathered in a small living room of the villa to discuss a small prenatal party. Eric and Chris were not very interested in these topics, so they had to hide in the study and talk about the company's affairs. You're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.